fund shorts, pulling the pastor role as well as pulling the teacher role. Probably a little bit more pastor during the summer.
A little bit more right now.
Yep.
Well, let's call the meeting to order. And can we have roll call vote, or roll call, please?
Can we wait on Kelly?
We need to wait. Are we on? All right.
Like
All
roll
right.
call?
Meeting is called to order and roll call.
All right. Austin?
Aye.
Illingworth?
Here.
Kimball? Here. Patterson? Here. Rustopolz?
Here. All right. Let's all rise for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moment of silence, please. Thank you. May I have a motion to approve this evening's agenda?
Mr. Restaurant, if I could, I'd
Yes.
like to actually make a motion to amend the agenda.
Okay.
I'm looking at number 4, letter C, where it says potential action. And that feels redundant to what's on number 4 there, where it says, at this meeting, the board reserves the right to take action on any item within the updates given by Dr. Neal and administrative staff. I think that, for me, I'm struggling with the way that 4C is written, where approval of board committee related to this transitional leadership administration and transitional operations does not make room for us taking action on perhaps another option. It's like, it feels to me like that potential action item there is already prescribed for us. And we've not had discussion. And so I would like to scratch that and in its place just reserve the right, as it says up here on the top of 4. Otherwise, it feels a bit loaded to me. Like that approval of a board committee is already something that this board is oriented towards. And we've actually not had any discussion about it, at least not in this setting. So I would like to just scratch that to make room for other options that might be discussed this evening.
I'll tell you, let me explain why I did it. I hear your concern, and I don't disagree with you at all, Chris. I was concerned that if anything on this was too vague in any way, shape, or form, that we might have legal problems. That's why, and maybe I was a little too specific. Do we have any comment from Brad?
Logically challenges this on us. So I'm Brad Miller, I'm a lawyer for the district. Chris, thank you, those are good questions.
Very good.
So we do want to make sure that at a special meeting that we've listed with specificity, we've learned that lesson well here. And so that is specifically the way this was designed. I got a chance to review it day before yesterday when it was posted. If you'd like to, the reason for that requirement of specificity is to avoid surprise amongst the board members. And so your motion could be moved and carried as long as all 5 of you are unanimous in seeking a change to the agenda.
So how would you want to make it more broad? Because
Well, I think it's already specified that there could be action taken on any item within the updates given by Dr. Hill or administrative staff. Now, that does not include, I suppose that does not include post-board discussion on updates. So to me, it would just seem like I would want to broaden it so that we could have the option of choosing what's the best path forward, the best interest of the district.
Right.
It may be a board committee, it may not. We haven't discussed that. So that's why I want it to just be a little broader. Otherwise, I feel like we're already orienting towards a decision.
I see what you're saying.
It just
Any
says
suggestions?
It says potential action. I mean, so maybe, maybe
Right.
not.
And again, the subtle nature of it feels loaded to me. Like you would ask a loaded question to someone in hopes that they would answer you the way that you would anticipate or hope that they would answer you. So this feels like, by putting that in there, I just feel like it is potential, but there's other potential options that are not listed on here.
Is there a solution that we could broaden it at all so that it's not just that we're voting on a,
Well, what if it says approval or disapproval? I mean, is that unloaded enough for you?
Mr. Estel?
yes, sir?
So this is intentionally constrained because we didn't want to leave the road open to something that might be precipitous in terms of a decision. We wanted to make sure that we were constrained in designing this meeting. If you were to find after presentations by Dr. Neal and the others that you have an impulse to think of a different direction, then, as I suggested before, you may make a motion, it can be seconded, and as long as all 5 of you agree to it, you make any motion you want to for a different action.
So that can happen after the approval of this particular agenda.
Yes.
Mr. Miller, clarifying question. If it's all right, Mr. Chair, so would then C need to be voted down for it not to transact in the course of the business of the meeting? So we're going to get to item B. We're going to talk about board discussion on updates, possible discussions about presentations. We're going to get to item number C. Is it required to review the potential action at that point? Or would the board have to at that point vote to say, you know what, we're feeling like this was a little bit precipitous, this was a little bit too advanced for this evening. We're not going to do C, because then you would have to actually amend the agenda to pull C off.
I'd like you to take action on C, whether it's pro or con. And I'm sorry, I'm unarmed, I don't have it in front of me. But yes, that's what I prefer you do, just given the nature of the meeting. So we try to give as much of a direction, sort of a, inspiration for what might happen here. Thanks to everybody, I appreciate it very much.
Right.
So
if
let's
that's
just say, when we get to that point, if we're not going this direction, let's just ask for someone to make the motion, it gets seconded and vote it down, or it doesn't get seconded, but you've moved on.
Yes, sir.
Just technicality.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on the agenda? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Austin.
Aye.
Dillinger.
Aye.
Kimball. Aye. Patterson.
Aye.
Rusterholz.
Aye. The agenda passes. On to 4. Information, discussion with potential action. At this meeting, the board reserves the right to take action on any item within the updates given by Dr. Matthew Neal and administrative staff. Updates. Mr. Neal.
So may I beg of the board patience as we begin? We can go in a lot of different directions tonight. And so as you ask questions, happy to give feedback. I thought about slides, and I thought about in the quick turnaround of this meeting process, what you would need to have discussion. I know there's an ardent or a direct discussion about the CFO or the Director of Business Services position. I kind of thought I'd start there. If there's something else and I need to keep track of time, is there a specific item, Mr. President, other than the Director of Business Services? I think Miles Tuttle is the lone standing executive director here. I did ask Miles to pull together some of it, just last minute today. Pull together your projects, Miles, in case the board wants you to update them on the projects and kind of how the summer projects are going. Our other executive directors are either out of state or on the western slope. So we can do it a lot of different ways. Happy to go down to business services. If you want to say pause, that's enough. We could be here for an hour or two just kind of talking about what's happening in the district. So it's up to you on where you wanted to go with that. If no preference, I'll start with the business services.
I would suggest, my opinion is start with what you prepared, and if we have questions along the way, we'll ask.
Yeah, I like the business services. I'll just say, I'm curious to hear about Mr. Garrick's new title, Chief of
That's it.
Staff, and what that
All
means.
related.
Okay.
Is there another topic other than that the board would be interested in hearing this evening?
I'm interested in general about transitional leadership. You know, what do you see happening
Sure.
over the next month or so in terms of anybody's duties changing or anything like that?
Got a little bit of that on superintendent search as a handout that I did pull together real quick. Pardon my brevity, it's only 4 slides. Okay, so let me start in story mode if you want to grab your popcorn and sit back. We have, back in February, Mr. Gustafson let me know that he was looking outside of the district, particularly for a athletic position. I think the Mountain Jackpot had an article today about his clandestine experience up in Fort Collins. We began talking in February. He did get the job as the as the basketball coach up there, brand new, $22 million high school, super excited. Then, as we gave him the award this year, as he pursued his passion of basketball first, got the job, and that's what he was not interested in working elsewhere. And then the Fort Collins superintendent called me and said, hey, I hear you have a financial guy that's coming into our neighborhood. So that closed down. We posted shortly after his final notice, and quite honestly, we weren't really happy with the candidates that we got. Went through the whole interview process, which for us looks like a paper screen involving staff, multiple departments. It's really important to me for staff to be able to pick their leader or at least be a part of that process. And so the finance staff came together with HR, with the academic staff. We had a team of about 8, 9, 10 candidates or committee members. Reviewed resumes, interviewed, recommended the final 2 to my office. I sat down then with my executive team. I think Miles was in that executive team process at that highest level. Picked a gentleman, really had a great conversation, checked his references, offered him the job. Went 2-3 days and didn't call us back, and kept calling back and said, we offered you the job, and that was it. He never proceeded forward to move forward with the offer. The candidate pool was too skinny, didn't feel the quality of the candidates were becoming of what we were looking for in an executive leader, so we started the whole process all over again. The process itself takes about a month from the time you post, a couple of weeks, review resumes, get folks in. Went through our second month, did it again, did the process again, no internal candidates. Again, went through the interview, offered, candidates came in. One of the candidates was head and shoulders above the other candidates, offered. She came in to work 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. Lasted 5 days and said, coming out of a corporate background, and said, this is not what I thought it was going to be, as far as complexity, as far as difficulty coming out of corporate, as far as night meetings, those kind of things. So she resigned on her 5th day. Really put us in a difficult spot because we had been through the process. At that point, it had been 3 months of going through the process. Brian's deadline was coming. Brian's last day was last Friday. We were out of time to go through that whole process again. And so began looking internal and to try to figure out, okay, how do we get through the next 6 months? How do we get through the audit that happens in September and October? How do we finalize the budget and do any addendums to the budget in November? So just really kind of a crisis point. None of the other candidates were remotely acceptable compared to what we had internally. So we looked at Mona Larson, and she's been with the district for 10 years. She was one of our senior accountants and dedicated to the district, knew she wasn't going anywhere. knew that she was not going to complain about the work because she had been in the work. She knew the work. And so I encouraged her to apply. By Colorado statute, we're required to post those types of jobs. And so we did do an open search, posted the job for the required amount of time. She did apply. I don't have this answer on the top of my head, and Dell is not with us, but I think she might have been the only person that applied. The position was not a high-level CFO position. The position was more, it was called a controller. And that is somebody that is specifically related to accounting, finance, building the books, doing the numbers behind the scenes, accounts payable, accounts receivable, working with HR and payroll, not sitting in executive leadership, not presenting to the board, quite frankly, not a lot of nights and weekends. She has 2 kids in high school, and we talked to her extensively about the executive director role, and she said, I'm not interested in being an executive director at this stage of my career. And so went through the interview process. Again, I don't believe that anybody else applied, and appointed her directly as the controller, with the knowledge and the thought that somebody's got to carry the water when it comes to presenting to the board and sitting on executive leadership. Sat down with Brian, Tina, Dell, and Miles, and said, all right, guys, what do you think about having somebody else inside the organization supervise? They all pointed at me and said, why don't you supervise the finance department for the year? And I said, no, thank you. I do have a background in accounting and an MBA, and I know that that's hard. Excuse me, that's hard work. And it wasn't one that I was willing at that point to take on. That was about the first week of June, last week in May. So began talking to Tina, talked to Dell, and Dell expressed an interest to step into a supervisory role. It makes a lot of sense for HR to be connected to finance. And so went through the process of trying to explain what would be Mona's responsibility as a controller, pretty substantially lower rate of pay by about 30%. And then what would be the responsibility of an executive director. Didn't feel right to have continue to add departments to Dell's responsibility without changing his title. Executive director of HR had to go. And so looked at a chief operations officer. That title felt a little bit more like Miles' title, who's in charge of much more of the buildings and the transportation and the technology department. Knew in the future the potential that this position would begin as the district shrinks, taking on other responsibilities, such as the mental health department, such as possibly food service, such as possibly transportation. So chief of staff felt right. We looked at job descriptions of other districts, looked around and see that would meet the minimum standard, and Dell agreed to it. So put Dell in that role about the 18th, 19th, 20th of June. The role did not promote him in the organizational chart to any higher role, nor did it increase his pay, which actually is kind of, I let him know that ahead of time. I said, this is a promotion in responsibility and not a promotion in pay. And so he stepped into that, started working with Mona, looking at Brian's last 10 days, trying to get a handoff ready, knowing that once Brian leaves, that Brian's gone. Right? He's starting his new job at Fort Collins, and trying to squeeze information from somebody that's starting a new job is pretty tough. Fortunately, Mona had been here for the last 10 years, working with Brian for the previous 7. And Dell and Brian have a good enough relationship that I know that Brian will answer the phone if Dell calls. And so stepped into that, has done a pretty good job over the last 10 days, 15 days as he's kind of been into that. Then I think when we sat down 2-3 weeks ago, realized that a lot of we just took the HR director, which is already a full-time job, and we gave him a whole new department, the finance department. And then on top of that, he's also going to have to take on the interest and services department, which is also Brian's responsibility. And so began looking at roles. Mona stepped out of an accountant role, vacated her role, a lot of the administrative responsibilities, and so started just kind of reshuffling staff to make sure that administrative staff, particularly Dell and Tina, had support. And so took the salary savings between the controller position, again I mentioned it was about 30% less than what Brian was getting paid, and started looking at an administrative support person to do the clerical, the filing, the bookkeeping for Dell, Tina, and Miles. And so that's what we ended up posting last week, is an administrative support person. In the end, Brian's salary kind of covered a variety of those topics, good or bad. Mona was probably an ideal pick to get us through the next year. We did sign a one-year contract with her to make sure that she felt secure in kind of stepping up. She's going to put a lot more time, a lot more effort learning the role. So overall, it's been a kind of a making lemonade out of lemons type situation. So I think we've got a solid team, and I think that puts responsibility where responsibility needs to be. Dell's been with the organization since birth. He went to high school here. So, and, I mean, it just felt right. It bought us some time, particularly in light of me stepping down. It provided some stability to whomever either steps in, or provided stability to, quite honestly, Tina and Brian and Dell, because they don't have to bring a new person along with them explaining where the photocopier is and how do you present to the board. They kind of all know that. Really tried to shave off filing, clerical, salary calculations, some of those number jobs that Dell was so consumed with as an HR director, and to give them to an administrative assistant to try to do a little bit more of that non-strategic work so that he can focus on the strategic impact of the organization. So Dell will be the presenter to you rather than Mona, but Mona knows that she'll probably have to sit in the wings and explain the tough numbers and that kind of work when it comes to the financials at the twice-a-year time that Dell would have to come and present to you on the financials. Chief of Staff also gives the board and gives this next superintendent a chance to add other departments to his role, should that make sense. And so at some point, you look at a vice president of operations taking on technology. I'm not minimizing Miles and his expertise. He's done an incredible job. But you've got two leaders with Dell and Tina that have been in the organization for decades, and they're really the pillars of the organization. Miles is learning a ton in his first year. I just want to make sure that Dell felt honored. And when he wished for the position, it made a lot of sense to give it to him. Questions?
What kind of supporting staff does Dell have? Because his job seems rather daunting with all these areas. Can you just tell us who he has besides Mona supporting him in that or assisting him?
Tina, Kelly, can you help me out on this a little bit? Other finance staff that are working over there?
We have Kathy in accounts receivable,
Right.
accounts payable.
She does
She's
AP.
retiring at the end of July.
And she's leaving as well.
So her position is currently open. We have Candace in payroll.
Insurance, payroll.
Correct. And then,
Peggy in HR,
Right.
processing.
yes, and then, I just lost her name. She helps out. Jessica, thank you. I was going Jennifer, and I knew that wasn't right. Jessica is a half-time accounting assistant.
Right.
If Dell was here, I would ask him, does he sense that he has the staff necessary to cover his job?
He didn't. And so that was kind of the struggle in the fact, I think he was concerned about the volume of HR stuff that happens during the year. And that's why we moved forward with administrative personnel, administrative support person to pull off some of the clerical. I couldn't expect for Dell as the HR executive director to also do the work of the finance executive director and not think something could come off. I think he feels good now. It is yet to be seen. Again, they're posting for a clerical person. The person probably won't start for another month. In the meantime, Brian's gone. Mona's stepping up, so Dell's doing both jobs right now for the first part of the year. And to getting a clerical person trained and ready, it's going to be September before they're really taking things off of his plate.
And that clerical position is more specifically to the HR side of things, or in general?
Absolutely to the HR side to get Dell into the role in the first 90 days. In full transparency to the board, and when I build a team, I try to really look at equity between each team member. Miles has transportation, Miles has facilities, Miles has technology. Miles could also use a clerical support person. So you could say that Dell has a lot of work to do, but Miles does as well. And so there's some sensitivity to the team just like I didn't feel comfortable raising Dell's salary because of the inequitability that it would cause between him and Tina and Miles. I didn't need a super salary or an assistant superintendent. I just needed him to have an appropriate title to cover his responsibilities. And so the clerical person will set out to support Dell the first 90 days, pulling things off his plate, and then be shared by all 3 executive directors. And again, that was kind of funded off of Brian's differential between Brian's pay and that of Mona, who is a lower level salaried person, but is just an incredible accountant.
And so there's no increase in benefits to Mr. Garrett from the new position?
None other than some of his clerical duties would be defrayed to secretarial.
And you mentioned changing the salary. If the salary had been different, would that have required us to post it before being able to fill it?
That's a question for the HR director. I really don't think so. Because it'd be an internal appointment. I think I had this conversation earlier today, is appointing somebody from within the organization would allow that appointment to transact without posting. It's a direct assignment.
I'm just trying to contrast with.
Other than the technicality, I don't know the answer really to that, probably.
You know, the making chief of staff and reassigning, was there any sort of board input on that?
Yeah, there was. The board was notified on the 20th of April in their Friday update, and let you know that that's what I was going to be doing. And that they actually named Dell in that Friday update, and let you know that Mona, it named Mona as well. And so if you'll look in that Friday update that was sent to you on the 20th of June, it's in there.
Okay, so no input on like the decision, just notification that the decision was going to happen.
As well, I would hope that the board feels comfortable communicating back when I say I'm thinking about doing this. And then those were my words in my update. It was, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing over the next few days. This was the scenario. This is what we're struggling with. Over the next few days, I'm thinking about doing this. From time to time, a member of the board will call me and say, hey, can we talk about that in a work session? Can we hold on that? And didn't get any feedback after that Friday update. And so generally, I move forward right afterwards. Give it a day or two and then move forward.
Because what I'm thinking is, you know, you've mentioned like a hiring committee. Thinking like, why not have like a board member, perhaps like a rotating, you know, board member that like whenever there's a hiring committee convened for like an executive level, principal level, that like a board member be a participant in the committee. I think that would help in terms of, you know, there's a voice from like the, you know, from the public officials who's not necessarily like got the same viewpoint as somebody who's come up through the system and things like that. I think about the way that's done with how our state chooses judges. For instance, you have like the 4th Judicial District, which covers El Paso and Teller, has a nominating commission, and some of them are lawyers and some of them are non-lawyers, and that's set out so that there's going to be this sort of broader, diverse, you know, group of viewpoints. So I tend to think that would be a good thing.
You know, I would say that on that, what you're faced with is some board members want to be really involved and other board members don't, from a matter of, you know, timing standpoint. I think that's really very germane to the conversation we're about to have with the superintendent process. There are certain roles in the organization, like the superintendent, that take a lot of a different pace to it. Quite honestly, in this case, when we had about 9 days before Ryan was leaving, we were backs against the wall twice. What do you say? We got to the altar twice and we're left twice in a 2-month period of time with his previous 2 candidates, and so we were feeling pretty desperate.
So, you have something? Just to cut in on what you were saying, if Mona does not end up, you know, liking the position or whatever, is it something that the administration team has ever discussed about outsourcing to an accounting firm? Is that even on the.
We checked with our auditor when we were in kind of desperate times about what that would look like and, how do we do that. Some of the sub-functions, we have a couple clerical staff that are retired, but really, it takes somebody that understands the state law, all of the funding mechanisms with the state, with Tabor and all of that. I mean, I have outsourced it in one previous role to a retired CFO, but it has to be somebody out of a school district for you to really understand it. So, I'm not saying no. So right now we're being really nice to Mona. Just hope that, when she says, I don't want to go to board meetings, if you happen to see her at a board meeting this next year, please know that it was, she was not, that was her least favorite thing. With girls at home that she's got in sports teams, that was what she was worried about.
I will come back though to my idea, in part because the other thing I think is it's a benefit to the board to be able to learn more about the positions that we're posting and the challenges that we're facing and things that we need versus we come in and we're kind of like, well, does Bella have the support he needs? And what about this clerical? And it's like if we had somebody in the committee, I bet a lot more of that stuff would be, absorbed, as it's happening, and we'd have better knowledge about that, which I think all of us would agree we could use.
I think there's other ways to accomplish that too, and I've had this in the past where general postings in the HR process or Dell giving updates to the board of what's coming as far as hiring, what that cycle looks like. I would also, I just think, yes, absolutely, if that's the direction the board would want to go. But I think you could request of your HR now chief of staff to give you a little bit more insight into the hiring process, what that is, how that works, what's coming.
I know, but then we're always on the back end.
No,
right? I know the stuff is posted on the website.
You wouldn't have to be on the back end. You could ask Dell to present to you, hey, when something's posted, am I dead? Testing. I think it was going on the way out. Thank you, Miles. Hey, when something's posted, could we get an update to the board, kind of like you do on Quora requests? I mean, you could do it in a reverse fashion, where the board was more in the managerial processes, and that's a real strategic thing for the board to decide that you want to do that.
What, somebody on the hiring committee, or getting notice of things?
Well, all of it, because you could go beyond hiring committee. You could also talk about reviewing resumes, and you could also talk. I mean, I tell you a story. In 2005, I was HR director in 27J, and I had a board member that said I really would want Hispanic surnames on more of our candidates. And so she came in and she worked with the superintendent, and we went through some training about what was she really getting at. She wasn't wanting Hispanic surnames. She was wanting more diversity in our hiring pool to look like more of the student population. And so we set strategies for that. And she spent some time working with the superintendent and I on what that feeling was. And so if the board has a feeling or a need or a missing piece, then maybe address that piece over the next month or two or the next couple of weeks and say, this is what we're feeling is missing. We don't really feel like we know when something is posted, or we don't really feel like when a title is changed. We don't really know when somebody's promoted from within until it already happens. Or, I think you would have the liberty to do that.
Right, and I would put that to the board. I still like my idea of having a board member on a hiring committee. Sounds like you have a pretty diverse group of people on a hiring committee. I think it makes sense to have a board member as well. I don't agree with what I think I hear Matthew saying about, maybe it sounds like it could be sort of sand in the gears or slow the process down considering how fast moving it can be. Mm-hmm. On the flip side to that, I would say you really only had to replace one position, right? Finance. I mean, we're not talking about but it's one position, and you would agree the 3 times thing, kind of a fluke probably.
I would hope. Yeah.
Right, it's not normally been your experience that you have to go through that all the time. I mean, that happens. Especially when people are moving here and it's a new experience. But it doesn't sound to me like we haven't happened enough that it's like, well, actually, the time suck or the time commitment is just gonna be more than volunteer officials are gonna be able to bear. I think we could do it. I think it would help us all learn more about what our leaders do, what the job requires and things like that, and make us better in our positions as well. I also like Matthew's idea though about like sort of getting advance notice of, hey, this is good, this is the posting that just went up for this executive level position. I'm not saying we need to do it for every position, but we do regularly, we approve everything.
Correct.
Everybody that's hired, everybody that resigns, everybody that even transfers, that comes to us on the consent agenda. Something more important like this, I think we should be a little more involved in it being like an after the fact.
I hear what you're saying, totally.
Are you just saying, just for clarification, you're talking like executives levels or
I feel like
down
executive level
to
and
principal?
and
or-
principal level, because I mean, our principals are, major leaders
Yeah.
within the command chain. So I was thinking, principals and like executive staff, really we're talking about like 9 positions there.
Correct.
So I think that would be a good step to, increase our participation in the knowledge of how these schools are run and administered. And hopefully, I think, reduce the sort of challenges on the back end where you have to come to meetings and, we're sort of peppering whoever we're peppering, and we're learning about it kind of after it's already done.
Sure.
But I really like Matthew's idea as well about like sort of like what we do before, like, hey, this is going out and this is the posting, and here's the update, we've got a pool of people and, things like that. Like the whole board should be kept involved in the loop on things, but I think we should have a board member and maybe we ad hoc, hey, this position's coming out, we're going to be forming a committee, we need to appoint a board member, or we set a schedule, it's like, first hiring committee come up, alphabetical, that's Chris, and the next one is Illingworth, and it just goes from there. I don't see any harm in it, at least.
Well, our principal levels are usually high, and we're kind of getting off subject here. But, no.
I just have, I have a lot of
That
background, I have
question
a
could be
lot
answered
of,
a lot
I have a lot of
later.
runway in this topic from my past. So what I'm hearing, and here's seeing some nods around the table, is a desire for the board to be a part of executive staff hiring, whether that's principal or executive directors.
And by involved, what do you mean? Like, what is the role of that committee?
Well,
Hiring committee?
really, it's reviewing the candidates, asking board-like questions. We may not always see a board perspective on things when we're hiring an executive director, and so bringing that to the table of collaboration and discussion, I think that's really important. I think that's a good catch.
I think it could increase efficiency, between administration and governing board.
Well, at least defend the decision because you were sitting there.
Right. And so is that committee an advisory committee, or do they hire?
No, that would be an advisory committee. Here's also how it works, I'm going to be fully transparent. The committee always wants to recommend one person, and I always require the committee to recommend 2. And among friends here tonight, I seldom go with the number 2 candidate, because the committee's normally right. 9 times out of 10, the committee says, we wouldn't want that second person, but since you made us recommend 2, we'll go ahead and recommend 2. The decision would still remain with the superintendent, because the superintendent has to supervise this person, hiring, firing, holding them accountable. If you deteriorate that to a different level of supervision, then that's a really different relationship.
But to be technical, the decision actually always lies in the end of the board. We have to approve.
That's correct.
You selected.
But the board as a whole, in that process, and we've been fortunate this year not to have to go down that road with any staff member, where I'm having executive sessions with the board, explaining to you the nuances of poor performance or lack of fidelity to a job description and those kind of things. But I've been in those before where the board is not always in agreement of, coming out of that even in a majority. And so I, as a superintendent, have had to cool my jets a little bit and be a little bit more patient on letting somebody go, or have had to ask the board to cool their jets a little bit and say, hold on, I'm still working on a performance improvement plan, let's give this person another 90 days. And so that's a real collaborative relationship too, that the board should continue to keep in mind of.
Okay, so we're talking about adding a board member, kind of an ad hoc board member, no one person, to an advisory committee.
I hear that as the desire of the board, generally speaking.
I wonder though, I would just like to push on that just a touch. Just because the board has assigned the chief executive officer, the superintendent, the responsibility of that with hiring and so forth. And so, since the superintendent is our employee, to have the boss sitting on an advisory committee and voicing opinion about a particular hire, I believe that puts, I don't know, I think for me personally, I would, if there's going to be a board involvement, I would prefer that the board member be an observer to the process and be informed in that way, but not have voice in advising the superintendent of who to hire or not.
Yep.
And I believe that would be a way of respecting and honoring the responsibility that this board places on the superintendent as the chief executive officer of this organization. So I'm all for, like, I mean, in an observation role of being, like, if it's about learning and understanding the nuances of the positions and what's involved, I think that's fine. Just like we invite the public to be a part of our process. I think it's okay for us to be a part of the processes. But I do want to caution us not to usurp the authority. Although we do ultimately have the authority as the hiring and firing, I would say that we have, at least historically, given that responsibility to the superintendent.
I don't want to push back, but I want to illustrate a different perspective though, Chris. If I've got one of you sitting on the committee and we're collaboratively coming together as a board superintendent connection, ex officio, however you want to say it, I want your opinion. I mean, I'll pull you aside and say, hey, what do you, maybe it's not to the whole committee of staff, you don't want to diminish. Staff are going to look for something totally different than a superintendent. I've been doing this for 2 decades. I have to be very careful in what I say. I'm in the midst of the staff interview. If your last CFO was really hard-nosed and really hard on you and holding you accountable, staff are oftentimes going to look for a softer person, somebody that's maybe a little bit more kind or soft-spoken. If somebody was absolutely not capable of making decisions and just kind of waffled all over the place, you're going to look for somebody who's decisive and that's going to go get it. And then when you get them for 3 years, you realize, wow, this person is really decisive and they're all into my business. So staff roles, and I've got teachers around the room. Many of you have been in hiring of fellow teachers or hiring of assistant principals at the middle school or other things. Sometimes you look for a different, just depending on what your last experience was. I have to come in as the superintendent, put that aside and say, this is what I expect. So my slight pushback would be, it is good. When I had Miles on the committee, after the staff had interviewed, we had a second committee interview, and I could really speak honestly with Miles and say, Miles, what do you think? What do you really think about? And anything that is healthy to have that. Maybe it's a advisory role of the board to a superintendent, and not telling the committee that they're off their rocker because they don't like this person or that person. I mean, it could get very influential. So I think there is a caution to the role, but making sure that there's a value in each person's contribution, I guess is what I'm saying. If we're small enough, right, that we don't, when we had all four finance people in the room picking their next boss, I was pretty quiet. I waited for my turn when it was my interview to kind of go through that process.
Yeah, and I just don't think it would make sense for us to, if we're going to participate, to be like silent observers, because we're not that way on like other committees that we do, whether it's membership on the deck or like facilities committees and things like that. We're active participants. And that's why we're detailed to those committees to bring a perspective, because ultimately it's because we are the boss. And so it's important that our perspective and opinion influence the process so that we don't have a situation where we go through the whole process and it comes to the board and the board is like, whoa, 180 from where we're at. In other words, now that we're involved in talking about it. So I think we should increase the participation. It should be a respectful participation. And that's how it has to work for everybody, respect on all sides. I think all of us pretty much could say we're outsiders to the, expertise and technicality of, the education business, and everybody gets their credentials and their degrees and professional development. But there's an important role for the layman, which is why we have this democratic system as well. So I think there's a way to do it, and I think we can all be respectful of everybody's opinions and make sure we're not being a bull in the china shop or something like that. And especially because we're not talking about, like, for instance, you take the DAC, right? Like, we kind of appoint, 2 board members to that, and it's like, for the year, and the other board members don't really get to participate. But I think if we were to set up as like on a rotating basis, it should reduce the problem of like, well, one board member's just got a strong viewpoint this way, and another board member has a strong viewpoint this way. Hopefully that would balance out, even though maybe it only comes to fruition once a year or once every couple of years. But I think, Chris, you and I have been going back and forth on this with Dr. Deal. We should probably see what some of our other board members think.
Any other comments?
I agree, most hiring processes, an employee would consult the boss, and the superintendent is our only employee, and I think we do have a role in our voice to, in that capacity, not overruling or being a bully about it or anything like that, but I think our voice is very important. So someone doesn't get, if they get hired and down the road, when we did not have a voice or any part of the process, that person isn't right. It costs money to train people. So I think being in front of the 8 ball instead of being behind the 8 ball is a good decision to make.
I also understand where Chris Olson's coming from, because we don't want to be overseeing or micromanaging, the position of the hiring process, but also being a part of the team and seeing, because if the principals and the exec team does not align with the district's purpose and statement within our policies here, I think that's where, maybe the superintendent will pull us aside and say, hey, what do you think about that? Is this someone that is aligned with the community's vision of our school? So somewhere in between. I like the idea of being on there, but would we be amending or adding policies to this? Is this within our expectations?
It'll just be an ad hoc.
Just ad hoc.
What we're saying is we're going to amend in the minutes that
Just do
it's
it.
the desire of the board to be on executive staff hiring and pull names out of a hat when the next one comes, or get a list, or who's available Tuesday night, however you guys want to do that.
Because it sounds like it's not going to be that often.
No, it really doesn't.
We would have plenty, usually there'd be, because we'd have advance notice, because maybe we wouldn't have an advance notice of my meeting, but we have advance notice of, we're posting it, and this is when, we've gotten these candidates in. There's plenty of lead up to that where we could put it on a regular meeting probably and say, hey, do we want to name this person? Do we have volunteers, or do we want to adopt an alphabetical system or something?
It's a scheduling item. Literally, I could send the board an email and say, is anybody available on this night, this day, 3 weeks from now?
But we could take action at a board meeting to.
You could do it over email. You wouldn't even require action. Because by statute, it would be a scheduling item.
Do we need to come up with a policy for this or not?
No, it's just, I hear the desire of the board. I will communicate that to our HR director and make it so.
Well, if it's if it's not otherwise premature, or for some reason our attorney thinks it would put us in contravention of what we've got on the agenda, I would like to just make it a motion so that we're not relying on just sort of like the sense of the board, but like a vote of the board.
You
Yeah,
should, let's have
no good or no good?
No, well, sorry. This sort of goes to what I was talking about at the beginning of the meeting. I would prefer that you not amend the agenda on a special meeting unless you are universally aligned on this. You're all going to agree to amend the agenda to add the action. And frankly, because it doesn't feel urgent or acute to me, I just assume you put it on the next regular agenda and consider it there.
Okay, thanks, Ray.
Thanks.
Good advice. So is there, I hear everybody in agreement about, or at least leaning the same way. Is this something that we would want to put on the next agenda or the next action meeting that we take?
I agree.
So
Yes.
is this
Yeah,
something you'd like?
What helps me is hearing Dr. Neal welcome the input, welcome the presence of a board member. If we find in the future that we have to have more detailed conversation with the superintendent, then I want to be able to do that. I wouldn't want to force this on a superintendent without them understanding kind of the heart behind it. So just with that, a good intention.
Let me see if I can work up whereas.
Yeah, and like I said,
Let's
it's,
see if we can kind of go that way.
And I wanted to hear from Cassie as well. Is that something that you would like to put on our next agenda to
Yeah.
make a decision on?
It sounds like as the majority of the board and, you know, looking to have that on the next agenda and also with Dr. Neal's advice. And so I would see that. I would I appreciate your whereas.
So before we step off of this, the two members in the room that are, or the two members on the discussion that are not present, that are probably on the recording somehow, is Dell and Tina. They're the ones that are, very frankly, are overwhelmed. And so.
Can we talk about Tina too and her role and like what she needs? I know she's not here, but can you share some of that in a minute?
Maybe.
Maybe.
It's pretty detailed. Yes, of course, if that's what the board wants to do tonight, that's no problem. I say what I said to just illustrate that I can't look at those two individuals without thinking they're overwhelmed and that they are completely full with their responsibilities. And so I'm thankful for, I would not want anything this evening to come across in disservice to their time and effort that they're about to have to make. Dell's learning as much as he can about the finance role to try to get the school launched in 6 weeks, 5 weeks. And so if he hears this recording, Dell, we love you and thank you for taking it on. This is not a discussion of your qualities as an individual or your qualifications as an individual. He does an amazing job and is truly exemplary in his performance. This was the discussion about the process, not about the person related to that process.
And Dr. Neal, when we originally called the meeting, we were hoping to have just a report from each of the executive, the administrators in the school, then to say what their role was in going forward into this school year. So kids were being served, teachers were being taken care of, and so since that couldn't happen because of vacation, you had offered to stand in and give that role. So Tina has a huge role, so how does that, I was hoping we would have a discussion about that.
I mean, we can talk about roles. I think that if that's where the board wants to go, shifting gears a little bit, I would like to take a breath from being the only guy speaking and bring Miles Tuttle up and to have him talk about his role for just a minute as one of those three, and then kind of shift a little bit into Tina's if we could, so I can just kind of regroup. And Mr. Tuttle, if you would just tell us what in the world you're up to, that would be helpful. And again, what I'm hearing the board say is the board would like to hear continuity. The board would like to hear future thinking. The board would like to hear that life is going to be okay. in the next stage as we're transitioning. That's kind of what I'm hearing the board ask for today.
And add on to that, there's a lot of disruption in the school. I think that our community needs to hear everything is moving forward. We have a plan in place. There are highly qualified people to lead during this interim period. And we just need to know that kids are being taken care of, they're safe, they're getting a great education, teachers, administration, staff. Jobs are going to go smoothly. And I think that the community and our WPSD community needs to hear that as well.
Sure. This is the man that's not necessarily running smoothly. He's going on fire right now.
Yeah, I got 2 or 3 things I'm doing this summer. I do have everything I'm going to be mentioning just in a packet, and this is going to be, there's a lot in here, but that's
I'm happy to take them on.
sorry, every time I get in front of the board, I feel like it's for the first time.
You like talk this like every time.
I know, it's been a lot.
It's like you, instead of Dr. Gill, I think it's you.
Yeah. Hey again, it's me again. So I wear a lot of hats. I'm going to focus on technology and operations, but I also do transportation and safety and security and probably something else I'm forgetting in there. There are a lot of different things in there, and some of them run together. But I'm going to just highlight some of the operations and tech things. So first, we'll look back just real briefly at key projects from this last fiscal year, last school year. And these are the things that this is not an exhaustive list. These are really highlights of what we did this last year. And so you see there are things from, things you don't see like HVAC units to signage and replacing bleachers and upgrading our fleet of vehicles, getting a couple more of those. That's the MFSAB. Those are the multifunction buses. They're you used to call them the short buses, but they're the ones that we take for athletics and activities now. Since there's been such a shortage of bus drivers, we've taken on more of the driving for those events, and so to bolster our fleet, we've got some of those 15 passenger buses. So those are some of the key projects. And this summer, we don't slow down. In fact, that's when we can get most of our bigger projects done because the schools are relatively empty. There's still staff that comes in. Custodians work harder than ever over the summer, but we can get a lot done over the summer. So you see we have high school carpet that will be coming in soon. I think probably in 3 weeks we'll start the high school, and that'll be a 2 or 3 week job. Middle school classroom carpet is going in as we speak. It's 47 classrooms that they're recarpeting, and we thought we were 4 to 6 weeks out. We got an update today. We're closer to 3 weeks out on getting carpet in at the middle school. Columbine playground. After years of fundraising and holding money for that, we were able to finally purchase some new playground equipment for Columbine. One of the vendors said they could have it delivered in 8 to 10 weeks, and the other, and we thought that was a long time. And then the other vendor said they could get it in February or March, and so 8 to 10 weeks sounded great. And so we're moving ahead with that. You might have noticed it's hard to get in and out of Panther Way right now because we're doing the seal coat crack fill. That's district-wide. Band room, we have everything on order and is actually being manufactured to finish things up, like ceiling tiles and cabinets. Those are the 2 big things, like the wall treatments and ceiling treatments and cabinets. And those are well on their way, but that's the one with the question mark there because that band room has been one big question mark. Signs at the Gateway, Summit, Columbine, where we replaced the floor, the commons floor at the middle school, and then a whole other list of the middle school and Merit Academy co-location needs. Looking at technology, there are a lot of things that we do over the summer. It's again like our busy season. So during the school year, it's a lot of maintaining, it's a lot of customer service, it's a lot of coming alongside staff and teachers as they do their jobs. And in the summer, that's when we upgrade and we retrofit and we refresh a lot of the technology that we have. And so this is a pretty typical refresh cycle that you see listed there. Nothing that we haven't really done. We're on a pretty regular schedule as far as refreshing Chromebooks and laptops, and we are getting some new iPads. That one's a little out of the ordinary, but most of that is pretty typical. Though we are the last thing on the list are smart. We're installing some more smart boards, and we're moving to more to multi-touch interactive TVs instead. That are more universal. They aren't tied typically to like one piece of software, something like that. They're a little more future-proof. And so we're piloting those in some classrooms and in our new middle school STEAM lab, and so you'll see those once they're installed. So that's the short version of our tech refresh. We have a lot going on. Oh, and phones on there. Yeah. So we just replaced 266 phones in the district with new devices, just the regular landline phones. They're IP phones, so they run over the internet, and they haven't been great lately. There's a long story behind that, but they needed to be replaced, and we just finished that. So we finished that on Tuesday, I believe, after doing one site per day, just kind of pouring everything into each school every day to get all of those done. So for staff that are here today, for tonight, there's you'll be able to check your voicemail again. You'll get your voicemail as an email again. And so those are it's been a long time coming.
Yes,
and
so
sorry. It's been
Miles inherited this. It's not his fault. It's been horrible. Sorry.
But I've got to hear about it all year long. So I'm happy about this as well. Yeah, but do let me know if there are any issues with it. There's a pretty long list here. This isn't everything with the Merit Academy and Woodland Park Middle School co-location projects. I think it's 20. As far as projects big enough to list, I think it's 23 projects that are required for this Merit Academy Middle School co-location. And I don't know, they're not 23 on that list right there, I don't think. So there's some of the smaller projects that are missing. I'm not going to go over all of those unless you want me to, or if you have questions on them. You see most things, when you see things that are 8 weeks out, 8 to 10 weeks out, even key card access, 30 to 45 days out, those are typically like supply and manufacturing chain issues. They were ordered as soon as we were able to, and so we're at the mercy of the supply chain, and there's some instances like with doors, for example, it's like, well, we have the materials, and in our factory we don't have the manpower to actually like manufacture these at the rate that we want to. So we're hearing a lot of that. So we're just plugging along with all those things. You can see there are a lot of things that need to happen. It's kind of this domino effect, like changing one thing precipitates another change and another change and another change, and some of them we learn as we go along. So like, oh, we didn't realize we were going to need to do this when we co-located facilities, because it's not that it's unprecedented, but it's little precedented, if that's the thing. And so there's not a handy playbook for putting two schools in one school building. These schools weren't designed for that, and so it's a lot of square pegs and round holes to get it going. But we have a small but very capable maintenance and facilities team, and we work very well with, it's actually a lot of local contractors to get this done, and contractors that we have long-standing relationships with as well, that know our facilities well. So, so this is, you see, it's a lot, but we're moving along with it. So. Any questions so far?
Question I have is actually about the playground at Columbine.
Yeah.
So, can you just give us all a reminder about like what's coming and? how
Yeah.
it's
So Columbine for many years has been kind of hiding away money, raising money, collecting.
Miles, we don't say hiding away money. And
So, but
just so that I'll let you recover that. So it's not quoted anyway.
escrow.
Yeah, escrowing
Escrow.
money, yeah, that's right. Legally keeping money, keeping money in all transparency, so towards the playground. We were able to put a little more money towards that as well this year.
So our graduating seniors this year, we're raising money as second graders.
Yeah, it's been a
It's
long
10
time,
years.
so it's like, let's just build this playground, guys. And so there's a whole process where Mrs. Slocum, Principal Slocum was able to, she elicited feedback from families and from students, and they were able to say like, we want these structures, and it's not a playground if it doesn't have this, and so they kind of gave their wish list, and we submitted an RFP to some playground manufacturers, and it was also open to any bidders, and got some bids, and were able to find something that worked really well.
I think
for
one of the bids
everybody.
came back and said, see you next year.
Yeah, those are the
Yeah.
February, there's like, yeah, we'd love to
See
do
you
it
in February,
next
there's can't do
next
it,
spring,
not gonna-
and then the other is like, we can do it 8 to 10 weeks, you guys just need to pick the colors, and so they picked colors, and then that was kind of it. So it'll be, yeah, I don't have the like the schematics for it in front of me, but it has like, you know, like it needs to have one of those zip line things, it needs to have what they call like a net structure, you know, one of those like climbing rope structures, and it's gotta have, we need 4 swings, and we need like one of those basket swings, so it has all of those,
Okay, Miles,
everything on the wish list.
On every one of Miles's projects, let me digress for just a second. There's a committee, and the committee has a committee. And, you know, it's just a very complicated, when people start talking about facilities and playgrounds and colors of carpet and.
They have strong opinions.
They have strong
about these
opinions.
things.
And so every one of these projects are precipitated on strong opinions. And so he's got to get up to the point of, let's just decide. I went to the high school in the day before graduation, and they wanted me to tie break what the new colors of all the new carpet was in high school, because they couldn't decide. They were arguing, you know, everybody wanted a different color, and it was just, since you're the big boss, can you just decide? And I walked away, I said, you guys can figure this out.
Yeah.
Right, because no matter what color I picked, I was going to be wrong to somebody. So Miles has to contend with that in April and May, and those committees and all of that. So when the ball starts rolling on a playground, the parent group that has been raising money for the last 10 years definitely had a strong opinion, and they invest. I mean, we put a whole lot more than they had saved, quite frankly. But it was a big initiative of ours at the beginning of the year to stop the hurting hearts that were doing fundraising. Like, let's get the playground in.
Right, and raising money towards a playground, like a few $1,000s at a time, you're raising money for a playground your grandparents can play on or something. They're super expensive too, and so we did move it along a little bit with being able to put some resources to it, but Columbine they spent a lot of time and raised a lot of money and put a lot of sweat into getting all this going, and so it's exciting that we finally get to have this up and running. So this fall, I mean, the students at Columbine will get to actually see the process of demoing the old playground and putting up the new one.
Is it that one that's like on Kelly's, like the playground that's like facing Kelly's there when you drive by?
No, there's another one on the other side of the building, so it's kind of between the back of Columbine and the modulars, but it's just south of the building. There's a pretty big footprint that we're able to put that playground on.
Is it complete like demo and rebuild?
It'll be demo the old one, using the existing footprint and the existing like border around it. put in new playground, all new playground structures, mostly new fill for fall zones and all that. It's a totally new playground for.
And which grades will we be using that?
That would be, for the most, like kindergarten kind of has their own playground structure on that one side. I mean, they have access to that one, so it could be K through 5, but it could use the playground.
We have kids that come using them like
Oh,
on
yeah.
Saturdays and stuff?
Yeah, if you go by any other time, if you park in the parking lot, you'll see families utilizing the playground, and they'll utilize this one even more. It's kind of an upgrade in every way. It'll be exciting to see. And they, like I said, they'll be able to see the process, like students and staff and the community see the process of demoing and putting that new playground structure up, and then a lot of ribbon cutting and that sort of thing.
Well, what's happening to the, like the old swings and everything?
So playground, so my understanding around playground structures is once the pylons are removed, it's typically hard to reuse those, especially at schools with all the buildings around it. So they typically recycle a lot of that. So this contractor that installs it will also demo and recycle all of it. Yeah, we can't just like pick it up and place it somewhere else. It is
Too
funny.
bad if we could auction off the historic playground business.
Yeah, it really is more of a permanent
Take
structure.
that swing.
Yeah, it's like a permanent structure in a lot of ways. So very last page you have here is moving forward. I'm gonna just highlight a few things on here. I mentioned the middle school STEAM build out. So you'll see that the middle school they've moved their computer lab to, it's adjacent to, it'll be like in a STEM lab makerspace and library. And so it's kind of an all new deal there. They'll have a number of 3D printers there. It'll truly be STEAM, where it's the arts department and the tech department and the library media department working together for like a true STEAM program. They're working hard for certification to be STEAM teachers and be designated as a STEAM school soon as well. And there's been a lot of vertical alignment with the high school. Mr. Owens is one that we've been working with on the high school side of things, and actually working vertically with the elementary schools as well to build in some robotics programs. And so you can see the next thing I have there is elementary robotics. That's one of the build outs we have on the elementary side, is bolstering our robotics programs for next year. We already have it kind of independently in some school sites, and we're pushing out kind of a universal robotics program coming up. We're also building in some innovation spaces and maker spaces in schools as well. And that'll be in conjunction with our library media specialists and some classroom teachers. We'll have some site facility improvements that you see in the list below, including long-term repair and upgrade priorities there. And this isn't an exhaustive list. This is kind of a look at some of the big improvements we have looking at the 2022-2023 school year. So that's the operations and tech world at a glance. Sorry, this was what I was able to put together in kind of a day's notice, but this is hopefully gives you a good overview of where we've been, what we're doing this summer, and some high-level things that we're looking at for the following year. It's yeah, pretty much it. Other questions?
I just have one question pertaining to the crash doors. Between the middle school and Mary Academy, can you just help me understand, like, are those the demarcation doors between middle school and Mary Academy?
Correct.
Those doors? Okay.
Yeah, so they're two hallways that almost intersect, but don't quite intersect, and we have to have crash doors that open both directions because those are fire egresses. So we're having a phase in that. So we're buying frames first because those can be manufactured more quickly, and we'll be able to frame and drywall around it. Then we'll actually get in the doors later and install those. But yeah, they're two are 2 areas in the school. So there's crash doors, and then there are 2 sets of classrooms that have these movable walls that are actually, that are actually, one side is Merritt Academy and one side is Woodland Park Middle School. And we are putting in a permanent wall, like, it's not in actually, it's framed and drywall that just needs to be mudded and all that stuff. So there's that's another area, but that's kind of a different situation.
So with the labor shortages and the supply chain issues, the 8 to 10 weeks is the guesstimate on when the doors will be in?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's where we're at, and the vendor we're using for doors checks with the manufacturer like almost daily at this point, to kind of see where they're at on that. So, yeah, that's where we're at as far as those crash doors.
So that's September.
Yeah, so I just talked with Ron Stone today a little bit about what we do in the meantime. So we wouldn't have the crash doors and walls there, so we were looking at what other options do we have. We can't just put up, temporary dividers or anything like that, because then we run into, of course, fire code issues. So we're looking at some other options as we were kind of in between that, so school starting, but still needing to have both school sites separated within the building, and so we're looking at some options.
If it would be helpful for us as a board, I'd like to get kind of an update on where that is, maybe in August, like,
Yeah.
if we're meeting as a board. I'd like to that feels like a really pretty critical piece to just that co-use of the space, so that would be helpful for me to have a sense of where that's at, if there's been a change, if it's been sped up, if it's delayed, that would be helpful.
And I'd be happy outside of board meetings to the direction of the superintendent to give other updates as well. I mean, I can give you all whenever we have them too, because I hope I have an update before the next board meeting is what,
Yeah.
I don't know, when are the regular board meetings anymore? I can't every week track.
So probably, in addition to just kind of the sense of timing, with this is like the options. Like
Sure.
if merit starts in.
Yeah, and then what do we do? And we're looking at other, and they're gonna be, yeah, I mean, we all knew this wasn't gonna be like tight and clean
No, right.
and all that. So we're looking at how do we be flexible to make sure, because at the end of the day, it's like, okay, we want all students in school, we want them learning, and we want them safe. And so how do we get there while still moving through projects?
Yeah, and I think I do appreciate the emphasis on the safety piece and just the fire codes and all of those sorts of really key, important details that we need to hear you to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're speaking of like the fire code and all of that. Those are that's one of those things where we move ahead while we're also working with like the fire marshal and the county and city to make sure that we're up to code. But as you know, like anybody that's been in construction lately, that cities and counties and fire marshals are very, very, very busy as well. So we've been getting on their schedule is not easy.
Mr. Miller wanted to say something at this point.
So Director Austin, that's a great sort of request. I just wanted to point out that we don't want to get in a habit of having individual directors add to the agenda by direct request to staff members. So this is the sort of thing where I want you to redirect and ask Mr. Rusterholz if he put it on the agenda, so we kind of more formalize these sorts of things, once you get this all sorted out.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Just to tail on to that, we had hoped to be able to have Merritt and Miles do an update on where we're at. So how about we will add that to next regular meeting, the first week of August. Like we had talked about having a Merritt regular update on how things are going and reporting to the board. And that is part of their agreement, I believe, as well, isn't it? Is that?
And you'll want to have Tom West in there as well. Kind of, he plays the intermediary.
So would that be accepted since we're discussing agendas? and
I would
things?
agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. You're voting
I want to illustrate before Miles steps off. We began this journey in November with the previous elected board, allocating resources, and then you again allocating resources. Over the last 10 years, the district has been very fiscally conservative on investing during difficult times. And so we went through COVID, 2018, reserved quite a bit of our resources. This will be the first year that we finally felt comfortable, particularly with the federal funding, ESSER dollars, to release some of those funds, and we released substantially.
With a healthy fund balance.
We had a healthy fund balance. This board and the previous board has both made the decision to revamp our facilities to the tune of more than $2.6 million this summer. And so what you see is a list that is pretty clandestine. It's not been done in 4, 5, 6 years, maybe even as long as a decade. I mean, when you say that we ponied up and we're doing the Columbine playground, that has been talked about for 10 years. That's a little bit emblematic of the structural differences that we're seeing in the Woodland Park School District. So you see the electric signs, you see the carpet going down, you see new flooring in the middle school, you see new bleachers. All of those things Miles's team has really done an incredible job with. And so it's by no accident that you have a brand new executive director sitting in front of you tonight that has not yet gone through his full cycle of 1 year. Actually, when is your anniversary date?
Yesterday. Yeah, I made 1 year and 1 day.
1 year and 1 day. So I would like to take a moment for the audience and the board to give Miles a hand, please. Welcome to you too.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, but if you don't mind, we do want to call out my maintenance team and facilities team. They haven't gotten any bigger in the last year, and we haven't added anybody, but we have, I guess, Ron, like, what does this look like compared to other years? Like, we've done more big projects in the last year than we've done in like the past, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and so my job is to keep him happy, keep him from quitting, and tell him what a good job he's doing, because he does an amazing job, and same with everybody else. I mean, head custodians do a lot of this work that you don't realize. They're not just cleaning carpet and emptying trash and shoveling sidewalks. I mean, in the summer, they're a big part of all of this stuff.
I came into work last week, and a conversation that Miles and the late great Brian Gustafson and I had last fall was that all the posts out in front of our schools were, over time, they were made of wood and they'd warped. And so they were not straight, they were not aligned. As everybody drives out in the parking lot tonight, you'll see all new metal posts that they've reattached the signs to. So, I mean, things like that just make us feel better, look more professional. Dave Buttery used to say that if you see weeds on the sidewalk, you wonder what kind of qualities of the city that you're running. And we're really trying in that effort. I think we're going to have a big launch on social media with Lindsay when the signs go live as a new form of communication, trying to get the message out there about the things we're doing. That was a really substantial investment for the district. Now we've got to pull the electricity and the fiber
trench and
to be able to do that. But those are things we've done strategically this year to honestly put our best foot forward, and the quality of education begins outside the front door when you walk into the building. So we look good, and then the quality of the inside is appropriately represented. So, and the high school is going to love the new carpet. Whatever. I do not know. I do not care. It's new carpet. So.
Yeah, except come by. We have like.
Dave, you guys, you probably.
Hopefully not pro or something like this.
It's either the green, no more the green kind, or more the black kind.
Yeah.
More the green kind.
More the green.
We would never.
Yeah, and we have a palette of like you get
only six choices,
because then we keep excess. We always keep excess so we can replace. It's all tiles now.
I continue to wait for the newspaper to write an article. Let's see, district puts more money into facilities and improvements in 1 year than it has in the last 7. I mean, it's just this incredible story there.
And it sounds like there's a real, what I'm hearing, surge in projects that have been taken up and completed, and far more than were even anticipated.
Yes.
I mean, I know, Dr. Neal, you came in with quite an ambitious plan. I think,
without merit.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
right.
what I'm saying. Like, when we talked, I think, back in September, you were telling me about the Columbine playground.
Right.
And that was sort of like a promise long promised and we're finally going to deliver. And I think, you know, you came in with a bold ambition and, you know, Miles stepping up, you know, you guys had a lot of energy and a lot of new vision of doing things, and then Merrick, you know, that was a whole nother, like you said, it's a whole nother page on here. And so hopefully, in addition to the incredible work that you guys have getting done, teams getting done, but hopefully next year will kind of taper off a little bit, maybe back to normal.
Yeah, my marriage won't last, just like this.
Well, just to go on with what you were saying about the 2022, 2023 repairs and upgrades with the shortages of manpower and, you know, we've been seeing that just when you ordering is taking forever. Is some of this stuff, are you already looking ahead of time to sort of help so that way you can?
It's a little bit of both. So some of these things were 21, 22 things
Got it.
that you either couldn't get done in appropriate timelines or were deprioritized for other projects. And then we have others where it's like, we're not waiting around, you know, so like we get things on the books.
Well,
as soon as
landscaping
possible.
is an example. So we put
Yeah.
$250,000 into landscaping in front of all of our schools because it needs it. You know, a lot of our signs and all that. And
We've gone through 7 contractors, and none can take things at this scope, or the ones that, we had one that could, that we weren't comfortable taking on, and so we've had to make tough decisions and kind of deal with the reality of like the job, of the labor market around a lot of those things, and so we have to look at some of those things, and he's like, all right, how do we do this different? Because the old way that I think these things have been done in the past don't always work.
Pre-COVID way.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I appreciate everything you've done and put together tonight for us in such short notice, and congratulations on your 1 year, so.
Thank you.
No, 1 day.
Can I ask Miles about the security camera storage upgrades? What does that mean?
Yeah, so we added in the last year, we had 12 new security cameras throughout the district. And so adding security cameras without increasing storage just decreases the amount of, like, I mean, we ideally want to have about 30 days worth of footage that we can pull from. And so we're down to like the 15, 20 day marks with all that. So we're upgrading our camera servers. So most of our camera servers are site-based, and it's putting in high-capacity hard drives if they can take any more storage to handle the increase in security cameras that we've installed.
And the backup system implementation, is that connected with the security?
No, that's totally different. So we have through our Google, so we use our Google infrastructure for everything. It's our email and our documents and all that. And the way it works is once an account is inactive, like a staff member leaves, students leave, once we close down that account, all those documents eventually go away. And we found that we needed to keep a lot of documents and a lot of emails longer, especially shared documents that maybe like a team or a grade level is using, or you have an outgoing staff member that somebody else comes in later and needs a lot of that. So we have a backup solution now that will keep all of that stuff indefinitely. So we pay for licenses for that, and then we'll be able to have student data kept, and we can decide, you know, timelines on that. We haven't really had like a real backup solution. Like once it was gone, it was gone. Or like say Google loses, you know, Google goes down and it loses some information. There's no third-party backup. So we purchased a third-party backup, so we'll always have access to that.
Anyone else? Thank you, Miles.
that was a great report. So if the pleasure of the board was to do that type of report, happy to help facilitate that by each staff member or executive director kind of updates. You do get a flavor of those with your EEs at a certain time of the year. And so it kind of makes sense that those are, you know, the lengthy EE, like I'm going to tell you in a minute these 26 things that Tina does. But the reality is when Tina does her report, and I don't have EEs in front of me, I'm kind of out of that mode right now, but when she does a report in September or October, she actually will go through and report on the effectiveness of each of the things that I'm about to describe to you. And so one of the things the board would want to consider with your new leader when you come in August is to looking at your ED calendar. And if there's certain things you want to hear earlier, certain things you want to hear later, you can adjust that calendar as needed. It's pretty set up to be in accordance with data that comes in. You know, for example, as HR is going to give you a hiring and turnover and turnaround and stats on credentials of new staff in October. Well, that's because they've just finished their hiring cycle. They haven't started the next hiring cycle. So there's certain times of the year that are more germane to what reports happen. But with that, let me just describe a little bit about Tina's work.
I think that mainly we want to hear, like with Dell, there were certain things that needed to change with him because of, you know, adjusting the leadership priorities around, and what adjustments is Tina undertaking, and we want to hear, does she need more staff, more help with her job? How's that going to be?
And I think they'll be glad to kind of communicate that back to you on what their capacities are. Right now, they're thankfully, I don't think Tina even responded back to my text last night.
Good.
I said, if you receive this, don't worry, I'll speak on your behalf. But on Tina's side, really, she's got about this 2-week window between end of June, 1st of July, and I won't even begin to presume to talk on what she's working on in totality. But just for the board to be reminded, we just got back off of our Marzano Highly Effective Schools Conference, where we took principals and we talked about strategies for implementation for improving instruction. So that's what Tina and I go through over the next 4 weeks. Really, we're scheduled on the 14th to go through a strategic planning session. What are our academic goals? The principals come back the 25th and the 26th of July. We talk about these are the goals, these are what we expect of you, here's how you need to improve. We do a 2-day retreat. We bring them together and talk about, how are we going to improve communications? How are we going to improve our math scores? How are we going to work on more closely meeting the needs of our IEP students? And so we bring those conversations together towards the end of this month in July. We set kind of our standards and expectations. And then we do the same with each one of these groups that I'm about to describe. So Tina does that with our mental health team. She also does that with our scheduling and our coding team. All students will be rolled into the next year. It sounds really simple to become a 4th grader, roll it up to the 5th grader. That's actually a manual process, and making sure that all that data dumps appropriately. We're adding a number 6 school this year, which we've had to apply for a new CDE identification number for merit. And so we've created a new entity. It's like starting a brand new school. So that's been unique for us. Those students will be allocated to that school identifier, and then those students will be rolled into our system. Pretty heavy lift. We're creating a brand new school electronically with the state. And that means every student's identification and all the previous history has to be put into our Infinite Campus system. So getting those student schedules in, making sure they're signed up for any testing that's required, all of that has to happen before the first day of school. So they're running and sprinting pretty quickly. Even our own students, coding them into making sure that Mrs. Smith's 3rd grade class, when they begin to take MAP testing, DIBELS testing, STAR testing, that all those students are appropriately allocated to those classes. That all has to happen during this 4-week window. When all the students are out, before all the students come back, making sure they're in the right place at the right time. Setting up Infinite Campus and enrolling those classes. Ordering all resources. So we have a refurbishment program for certain grade levels. They get refurbished, printed resources, books, periodicals. All that has to happen, and Lane and Tina's working on that as well. Calendars and events. I laugh every year. My entire career of 22 years, we have the 100th day of school, and it's never on the 100th day. Even schools do it, like you have one school does 100th day on one day, and another school does it on another day, and so this year we've set out to decide which day is the official 100th day of school. That's calendaring. Which day is reading week? Which day is grandparents' day? Which day is, so all of that calendaring, so we come back to the first day of school knowing uniformly, and that's kind of an organizational strategy that I've used and that Tina has adopted to make sure that our calendaring and events are all aligned. And that Lindsay's shaking her head yes over there, so that she's, and the community is knowing, the community is not running around like a chicken with their head cut off, as my father used to say. I mean, it's just like we know what we're doing. I don't know if I can use that phrase anymore, but like they know what we're doing, and it's clear. Posting of all lesson plans and sensitive subjects is a huge project. And so if you remember back to February, the approval of the new sensitive subjects policy requires that teachers have their syllabus presented online. Creating that, making sure that's up to date, making sure that teachers are moving forward in that. SPED, IEP placements, we get a massive influx of students every year that have to go through the IEP process. That law is changing. And so we oftentimes don't, we're no longer allowed to receive that information ahead of time. That means we find out that information after students have enrolled. So there's kind of a post-event enrollment that has to happen with that. Staffing then is related to that. So you get a student that has a one-on-one paraprofessional. Tina and Dell and I sit down for about 3 days solid, 3 6-hour days, 3 5-hour days, and we look at staffing. Who needs IEPs? Who needs paraprofessionals? Can we split paras? Can we send teachers between two different schools? You gentlemen heard, and Sue did as well during our process of ratification, where when teachers are transferred, that there's a process to that, and we don't just shove a teacher into a classroom, that there's options and there's support, and we help move their things. And so all of that has to be decided in about a 3-day window. That's what Tina and Dell do from a staffing standpoint. Now during the summer, we're doing math training for our new math curriculum. We've got summer school going on right now as well. We have a focus on academic improvement. What is that going to look like for next fall? What metrics are in place? Tech updates, program approvals. So Miles is sitting in the back. Every year we go through this process of evaluating which tech is appropriate to use in which classrooms, which apps, which programs, what are we adopting, what are we decommissioning. All of that process has to happen during the summer. So anything decommissions comes off, anything recently approved goes on. So the reallocation of technological resources in classrooms for teaching purposes. Crisis response, safety training. All of our staff go through ALICE training every year, making sure they know how to evacuate and they know how to respond. That's all Tina. She has to help facilitate that. Class schedules with principals. Particularly at the secondary level, Tina was a middle school principal. She works with principals to say, okay, this teacher looks like they only have 6 classes or 6 kids in this class. It doesn't make sense financially to have 6 kids in a class. We need a minimum of 12. What are we going to do to reschedule those students? And so all the scheduling and rescheduling that happens in middle school and high school to make sure that we're appropriately staffed. And then she's also in charge of the last 6 items: homeschool, open enrollment, staffing for special education, Panther Academy, online academy, which is getting a major revamp, and then implementing all the strategic initiatives that she and I decided on for Marzano's highly effective schools. The last one is mentoring in culture. I've worked a lot with Tina and principals to remember that schools happen because of culture and relationship, not because you tell people what to do. And so it's really important that during our training over the next, on the 25th and 26th, the principals are remembering what we studied this last year, the 5 languages of appreciation. What does it mean to build culture? We spent a lot of time talking about people's personalities on your team development. All of that comes through Tina as she's helping principals think about, maybe you're a little bit too hard. Maybe you're a little too soft. Maybe you need to step it up a little bit and figure out a faster pace. Maybe you need to slow down. That's a lot of what Tina does from the heart that she's really good at. And so she could probably tell you more about kind of each one of those processes, but it's also why she's on vacation for a week. So.
Now, what about her staff? What kind of help does she have going forward into this year?
She has the same help that she's had in the past. We've looked at her technology team. She has a couple staff that previously Tina had supervised the technology side. She retained 2 staff that are working remotely.
Yeah,
1.5 staff that work remotely on the technology side. Kelly continues to support her administratively when she's able to. And then Tina has all of the mental health team. They're fairly self-sufficient. She has the staff at Panther Academy. She has the staff of online Panther Academy. And she has GT coordination, that kind of thing also reports to her. So 25, 26 staff, 28 staff, she can tell you. Everybody understands that both Tina and Dell and Miles are pretty full.
So going into this transition stage, she has the support that she needs to get through this period of time.
She does, and we've allocated appropriately ahead of this to help her get there. Now, if the board were to choose this evening in our next level discussion about superintendent placement, if you decide, as one of the things we'll talk about is promoting from within or allocating an interim, if you chose that Tina and Dell were to be the interim superintendents, I would tell you probably not. Right? She can't take on more and still be expected to do the work that she's doing. We would need to consider what staffing would look like for that. But in her current role, she's going into year 2. She's doing an awesome job. And when staffing needs come up, we simply sit down, we calculate, we arbitrate kind of what the needs are, and then I look at the budget and we say, yep, you can do that for a semester, or yep, you can do that for a year. And we've done that a couple times this year, where she had a grant funded position. We have a few grant dollars. Our restorative justice program that ended up being grant funded this year, freed up some other monies for her to be able to use. So we're a pretty collaborative team to say, Tina has not, I'm going to say it this way, Tina's not brought any staffing requests to me this year that has been denied. Neither has any of our staff. On the other side of that coin, they haven't come to me that often, because they also understand in a declining enrollment district, ladies and gentlemen, you can't continue to add staff. You have to kind of figure that one out too.
Any other questions?
David, do you think we could put on the agenda at some point to hear more about the technology decommissioning and recommissioning that Superintendent was talking about?
Absolutely, the apps approval process.
Yeah. And just kind of where we're at on that.
It's kind of unique every year.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear more about that. And whether that's an email that can be sent out saying, hey, this is what we're using, or whether it needs to be a presentation, whatever. I'm open to suggestions on that. But maybe something to talk about again in another meeting. I did want to, I was heard you were talking about the sensitive subjects policy, Matthew. I remember, it's been a while since we talked about it in a board meeting. But if our memory serves correctly, kind of had a roadmap on that, and Ms. Cassins was going to be getting input from, I think, like each individual school, like a committee from each school, and making sure that she was getting input from all the important players before it was kind of finalized. But
Spent a lot of time on that in February.
has language been finalized? I don't remember giving
It was.
back to the board.
It was finalized in February. I'd have to really go back to my notes to see if it was sent back to the board or not.
I think it's on the website.
I don't know that it changed from,
Like what was presented in
yes,
February.
I think it was obtaining buy-in for the language that was originally developed,
Mhm.
not materially modified. And so the language is on the board website. It's also, on the district website. It's out there, has been since early March.
Oh, I thought it was still the old language that was on
I'm looking at Kelly like,
It's still the old one.
still the old language. Thank you.
Yeah, I was reviewing through stuff and I had a note to ask.
Ask Tina where it is.
Yes, where we're at with that. Because I think it's to go into effect for 2022.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we're still on track.
Cool. All right, as long as we haven't lost track of it.
I know it's taking a lot of staff energy right now. They are aware of it,
Yeah.
because it does have implementation requirements.
And that's why I want to get it up on the website so it's available. And last thing, you mentioned the Marzano strategic initiatives. What's up with that?
Marzano's has 20 points that they espouse that highly effective schools do. And they're oftentimes set in priority order. So we spent a day and a half kind of looking at these highly effective components, and they're almost an MPSS process. It's almost a first, understand what your the dynamics of your school district are, and the ethnicity, and the culture, and the demographics, and understand what the learning modalities are of each one of those students. We go through and look at the data of how students learn, and so the team and Tina are kind of working through those. It's not overnight. They'll tackle probably the first 3 out of 20 this year of how do you become an effective school. Part of that is having a clear rubric for teacher evaluation and teacher feedback, making sure that our evaluation system is set up. So it's much more prescriptive than maybe what we've done in the past. So we realized we had our walkthrough protocols. We walk into classrooms, we see what teachers are doing, very effectively done, and that was really successful. And then we realized also through the training that maybe we didn't always communicate what the expectations were for teachers up front. And so we've got a great walkthrough program, but we don't necessarily communicate what a great classroom needs to look like. And so those are some of the projects that Tina and principals will begin working on in August. And that is, these are the strategies to how do you improve an instructional learning environment. Very academic, very scientific, and that's where the principals have to take those ideas on the 25th and 26th, then rolling into their weekly administrative team meetings and flesh out what are the implementation strategies to improving instructional practice in the district. So very technical work, but pretty rewarding for principals. That's the right work. It's a lot easier than, it's a lot more beneficial, feels more right than disciplining students or dealing with, parking lots that are too full or other mechanical things. Really working on the instructional practice.
So is that the sort of thing that would lead to any change in like the handbook?
Not really. It's more of a strategy number 5 is really making sure that your parents are communicated well with. What are you doing to communicate well? So they're just key factors of successful schools. So when we would go in and evaluate with the state or with other charter schools, you have a process evaluating the components of the school, whether it's governance, whether it's curriculum, whether it's leadership, whether it's data utilization, whether it's, those are all things that Tina's having to kind of think about. What do we have in place and making sure that we're putting the right things first, big rocks in first. Because I think at times we get other things that are not necessarily, again, it's our example of our walkthrough protocols. We have great walkthrough protocols, but we haven't spent a lot of time explaining to teachers what is a great classroom and what it needs to look like. So,
You mentioned there were like 20 initiatives, but they're so big or time consuming that you could really only go these 3
or 4 a year.
And I mean, do we regularly attend this like every year or something like that?
I mean, I think that you're always in this continuous improvement model, whether it's Marzano or whether it's DeForest, PLC work, or you're focusing on, what your staff and culture looks like. This year's focus is on the Marzano work.
And what are the top 3 or 4 that you think could be tackling?
I'm going to leave that to Tina to explain to the board if I may. Because I think she needs to flesh that out with principals 25 and 26 of July. And they really need to come down to obtaining the buy-in from the team to say, yeah, these are the 3 or 4 things where we're really going to focus on this year. But be happy to put that on a future agenda.
Okay. Sounds interesting.
What else do you have for us?
I'd like to shift gears to the hiring process for the CEO superintendent role, if that pleases the board.
Sounds good to me.
Brief handouts. Members of the public, I'm going to go ahead and try to put this up on the board so it's not as boring. If you just be patient with us, I'm going to email it to Miles, and he's going to try to project it a little bit. And then, Mr. Owen, I may have overstepped. I think I went too fast in the agenda. Do you have something that you would like to read or present still, or did you not want to do that this evening?
No, I would love to.
Okay, let me check with Let me check, it is next on the agenda, and I apologize sincerely, I overstepped it, but let me ask the president if that's something he'd like to do now or after. But by agenda, you would be next. If you want to clear your throat and drink your tea.
Which one did we jump to? Because I thought this was still falling within A.
You know what, it could, yeah, it is, all of this still falls under me, I guess.
Okay.
All right, so hold that. If you wouldn't mind sitting through this, and then we'll get, okay. Thank you, Miles, for pulling me up.
We're looking for the little clicky thing. I moved out of this today, so I don't know.
No, it's okay. If you would just pull it up, there's only 4 slides. Just kind of,
Sure.
it's clicking through manually. Did it hit your email? Okay, as we sort of started, if you wouldn't mind projecting, this is my quick, just from my experience, this is my quick edit of just a real fast thought process. I mean, I guess this will be rough, but I wanted to put some ideas and get the board to be thinking about what are you up for? What do you feel like doing? How much are you up for? How much involvement? So I just grabbed from my perspective, and this is only mine. I will just give that caveat that you will have your own thoughts, your own perspective, your own ideas. I just wanted to put on the table what I saw as opportunities, and then maybe some roadblocks. And so I have 4 different pathways for obtaining a superintendent listed in here, but before I did that, I wanted to illustrate some of the hurdles up front, because as you consider those 4 pathways, I would encourage you to really think about these next 7 kind of hurdles. So Miles, if you would, next slide. Whether you decide to hire a superintendent right away, you decide to appoint an interim, you decide to not have a superintendent for the year, that all of these things should be brought into consideration. Number 1, superintendent hiring happens in February, and so we are out of cycle for that. Most superintendents would have a contract already in place. So it doesn't preclude somebody from leaving their district, but it definitely is a harder sell in July and August than it would be in February and March. We're also close to the start of the school year. Our team collectively needs to be ready in 3 weeks. And so principals are back. New teachers arrive here on August the 11th. Like what is the team going to focus on? What are their last year we built marshmallow castles with right? Remember this?
Not my strength.
Not your strength. We put marshmallow castles as a team for about an hour. Kelly did great. But it brought the team together, right? There's a teaming aspect that happens during the summer. That's when your team comes together and says, yep, we're going to make it through this next year together. And that's really important for a new leader to have. If they're not hired in the next 3 weeks, they still need to bring about that cultural connection. I'm here for you as a relationship, not position, right? Number 3, new organizational chart with executive leaders, as we've already discussed extensively. If I was a new superintendent coming in here and knew that I had lost a business officer and I had gained a chief of staff, I would kind of look carefully at that position or that job, because I would not want to step into a situation where I can't be successful. If Dell's really going to struggle, then I would know that Dell's going to need to, and Dell's amazing. He may need no time, but he also may need some time. He may need some help. And so there's some effort there to be aware of. Community unavailable during the summer. I use that as a placeholder. Number 4 is really important for the board to consider. You don't have to, but it's really important for the board to consider involving the community in the hiring process of the next superintendent. There are people on my committee, there are people on most committees throughout the state that have various business owners, city council members, mayor, even Deb from the chamber, other people in the community that are part of that review. They're not making the decision, but they are giving advice to the board on what is an ideal superintendent for this community. Some of your wagon boss candidates, folks who've been in the community for a long time, are really important so that that leader can have buy-in. I think for my first 6 months, I had people walking up to me on the street and saying, hey, I was on your interview cycle. Hey, I saw you in the interview. One guy said, hey, I didn't pick you, but you've done a good job. Right? So I think that's important for the community side of things. Again, it's the board's decision. I know there was a discussion last year when I was being hired that the cabinet wanted to, executive leaders wanted to be a part of that decision. The board was really clear that it's a board decision. And so, yeah, that's part of that process. Legal postings, Brad and I talked about this briefly. If you go out to choose a permanent superintendent, a non-interim, non-short-term, you do have certain posting requirements for how many days you have to post out to the public, and so you need to be aware of those. Number 6, a new leader's desire for a solid board. And that is, whether you believe the recall effort or not, nobody knows. But if somebody coming from the outside would read the social media and wonder, is the board that's hiring me today going to be the board that's supervising me throughout the year? So that is a caution, that's an awareness. So the board may want to wait until after the end of the recall effort is clear to be able to post and interview somebody. Just a consideration. Board training and teaming. I left this one on here. I talked briefly before the meeting with Mr. Rusterholz. The board really needs to get to the point of a 5-0 vote when you come down to hiring a superintendent. Doesn't always happen, but it's important for that leader to feel the full support of the board when you're going into your first year. And so the board thinking about what dynamics you're looking for in a leader, the board thinking about that you're on the same page, or the type and style of leader you're looking for, that's really important before you go into the interview cycle. I've had a couple colleagues across the state that when they received a 3-2 vote by the board, they declined. In two cases that I know of, they just said, you know what, maybe this is not the right school district for me right now. Because it's a caution to a new leader coming in that if the board and the superintendent can't come together, if the board can't agree, then that's a hard foot to kind of start off on. So the board spending time in contemplating what you're looking for in a new leader is really important. Questions on that before we shift to the 4 options? All right. Option 1 would be to promote from within as temporary. My recommendation would be to promote Dell and Tina both as superintendents. They're both long-standing, multi-decade supporters, Tina being the academic side, Dell being the operations side, and I have not had this conversation with another human soul. So this would come as news or a shock to them after they were to see this on social media tonight. But I would I would think that both of them taking on some part of that responsibility. They have both done it. 2 years ago, when the previous superintendent left in November, they helped facilitate this, so they're actually a little bit seasoned in taking over for a superintendent. They have that experience. And then you could combine option one with any one of the other options. Option number 2, promote temporary from outside. So you all were familiar with, except for Cassie, with Dr. Rod Blunk. Came in and did some training for you in December. Dr. Blunk just finished 81 days working for the Windsor School District. He was contracted to come in 3 days a week, keep the district in track. So who around the state would be able to come in as a temporary or an interim from now until the end of the year? Option 3 is post now, interview, hire permanent from inside or outside, with the caveats that I just previously illustrated in the previous slide. Option number 4 would be a combination of either 2 and 1 leading into it. So you would have a temporary, or you would have a promote from within temporary. And then you would post as of December 15th, interview and hire. What you may end up with is a superintendent that's willing to come in a week of February, a week of March, a week of April, a week of May to kind of get things rolling or keep things along. May figure out who you get through that process. And they may be able to start early, you never know. But fishing season, your fishing license, so to speak, for superintendents happens in January and February. Questions on this one?
So with the option 2, for example, is there the same sort of legal postings requirements as an interim?
My understanding is no, but I would defer to the attorney.
It's not exactly the same, Chris. We still would have a posting, but we don't have some of the longevity requirements after you've made a finalist selection till you can appoint the candidate. So I'll explain that more when I step up, but it's a little different.
Thank you.
All right, so next steps, just again, I'm putting myself out there. The board might have a totally different direction of kind of what you think. This is sort of the best I can do as I thought through it today. Decide on a consultant. A lot of school districts, this district did this from within. I would just tell you from an advertising and exposure and the breadth of notice, you may want to hire a consultant that has some broad connections. There are candidates. Example is Sterling School District, just went through this process, and Sterling is 76 miles down I-70, it's a little bit out there. They went through the process once or twice, and they did not have any applicants apply. And so they had to go through, then they made the determination. I think the first time they did it, they were doing it internal. The second time they did it through a consultant, and then the third time they did it through a much larger company consultant that really helped them broaden their search parameter. The Elizabeth School District is going through this process as well right now. They've just hired an interim to stick it through December, and they're going through the process of hiring somebody beginning in December. Those are the only 2 that I know of in the state. Deciding whether you want to use consultants or you want to put it on the shoulders of internal staff. Again, let me illustrate that both Dell and Dell are going to be very full. This sometimes will come down on his shoulders to facilitate this kind of hiring process. You may want to seriously consider using a consultant to do that because of Dell's new responsibilities. The board really needs to spend 5, 6, 7 hours developing look fors. What do you want in a leader? I would also encourage you to hear surveys. Oftentimes you'll see surveys on websites. What does our community want from our superintendent? What do our teachers want from our superintendent? So you're developing your look fors, and that'll take some time. What type and style of candidate do you want as a superintendent? So making that very broad. Job description, making sure that if you are thinking about roles and responsibility changes, you have a lot of policies that describe very clearly the role of the superintendent. If that's changing, that would be important to add or modify that. You don't want to be dealing with that during the contracting phase. So my contract was really clear. It's a contract that I had seen previously. If you're going to be changing that, then you need to do that now before you do your job posting. Because it's important for the person applying to know, hey, this is kind of the structure that I'm looking at. Developing your timeline, whether it's 4 weeks, 4 months, and then articulate an interim decision structure. So meaning who is in charge of signing and approving, even if Dell and Tina are not allocated as interim superintendents, my responsibilities need to be delegated to someone. Now, I can provide that as a recommendation to the board for my remaining 3 weeks of employment. After that point, then my signature at the bank, my signature on all of our retirement accounts, my signature with the insurance companies, all that needs to go to somebody. Again, my personal thought would be Tina and Dell together as a two sides of the same coin kind of thing. But that'll need to be a decision, or at least a discussion, probably this evening. So if we want to leave it here, Miles, for just a second, I think this is where the discussion is.
Well, originally when we wanted to call this meeting, it came out of what was the new position that Dell had announced in his email. Also came out of that, we really need to provide a clear path forward so that there's a lot of questions of the community, questions of the school. So we need to at least give some security for moving forward for all the people we've discussed, we've talked about before. So what, this may be an information time, but we had also planned before this meeting to have one in 2 weeks. So not next week, but the following week. We had already scheduled one. Do we have that exact date?
Is it the 18th?
I think it is.
It's on a Wednesday, it'd be 2 weeks, would be the 20th.
And that would put you just a few days past your medical events.
Say that again.
That put Mr. Russell was a couple days past. A couple days past his medical event. So he has a medical leave plan.
That would be that week of the 20th.
When are you leaving? President Russell?
I'm flying out next Monday, this coming Monday.
The 11th?
Yes.
Okay.
So then I won't be back until the weekend.
I think the discussion about scheduling is fine. I think if we could stay with the agenda, I'm a little resident to start into a discussion at this point, because I think we also want to hear from Native Owens and as well as Brad and Miller.
Yes.
This might be a time
To
to
digest.
ask questions, maybe, or digest, and maybe even in our discussion, it would be helpful to ask you some questions, in particular about how you would see the heavy lift that both Dell and Tina carry right now, how you would see that adjusting if they were to actually step into an interim position of co-leading. So just anticipate that question. But I think for me, I would love to hear from Nate as well as Brad, unless you have anything else to add.
Well, I would just give one illustration to what you just described. Dell and Tina did an incredible job through COVID, meeting daily on closing classes, not closing classes, cohort tracking. The COVID event really brought those two individuals and Brian together. There was literally an hour to 3 hour meeting every day that they had to do. The determination every day was, do we close this class? Do we close this school? How many markers do we have for illness versus how many markers do we have just for absences? And so I would envision a similar process to superintendenting, if you will, where Tina and Dell would just kind of collaborate really daily on decisions and what needs to happen and kind of that work, you would need to consider their other responsibilities. I don't know if it's 50% of their work or if it's 30% of the work. I would like to hear their voice on that and not speak for them. Kind of what would be their capacity. These are two individuals that literally beat me to work every day and leave well after I leave. They're already, I mean, they put in a tremendous amount of time. And that's not to say I come in at 10 a.m.
But technically you could. I agree with Chris, though. These are really good points worth thinking about, but some of the questions that spring to mind from that are legal questions, so I think it's wise to probably, I don't have any questions, ready to hear from Nate and Brad, but it's just me.
Anyone else have any questions?
No, I don't at this
Yeah.
time. I would like to hear from Nate and our attorney, Brad Miller, before going forward.
All right, well, at this time, let's move forward to Nate and whatever you have.
Guys, did you want to take care of the screen, or do you want me to just stand up?
Pretend it's not there for a minute.
This is not Nate's favorite thing to do, just to let you know.
Absolutely not. But that's all right. I'm getting, I will wait for Miles to take care of the technology.
Yeah, are you sit?
Oh, yeah, I'll sit if that's what is provided for me. It seems like it's what the expectation is. So. Good evening. For those of you that don't know me, I am Nate Owen. I have recently been elected to be the president of the WPEA, a representative of teachers. And so when I heard about this meeting, I had actually requested a few weeks ago to have a word or two with the board, just to introduce myself, one to our newest member, and just to connect with the board. But first, I'd like to take a moment to thank you, Dr. Neal. The amount of work, the amount of effort that you've put in, the amount of accomplishments that you've done over this past year, we'd like to recognize you and say thank you for all the hard work that you have done. We definitely, I have personally spoken with several staff members, many, that have shared with me that you have been a pleasure to work with, and I have notes on this. So I know personally many staff members that would agree with me that it has really been a pleasure to work with you. We look forward to seeing you in the community, and we look forward to seeing you around these schools. And we just want to wish you the best for you and your family going forward. So I just wanted to start off with that. For the board members that are present, which is everybody, so thank you for that. As you move forward with the superintendent vacancy, you heard several things from Dr. Neal going forward. And I'd love to reiterate, and I actually had written some of this down. You stole my thunder, so I apologize if I repeat anything. But really, we'd like to allow, we'd like to request that the board goes through the full superintendent hiring process, starting with what's best for the school district. This is going to allow Woodland Park School District to go through a great time, and moving forward, I really would hope that we can choose the best candidates moving forward. I hope that we can place the right interim superintendent for the school year of 22-23. Any individual that will be selected, or individuals that will be selected to fill this interim position should definitely have working knowledge of school districts, have qualities that work really well, and have those necessary skills and background to be able to do this. By having a interim superintendent in place, Woodland Park School District, like many school districts across the nation, can begin their search in this late fall or early winter timeframe. We believe that this is very advantageous to the Woodland Park School District because many of the other school districts are already either finished or working in their, finalizing their application process for the superintendent. And that really limits the pool of superintendent candidates that would really work well and be the best moving forward with the schools. Beginning the process in the fall or the early winter allows Woodland Park School District to be in a strong position. That strong position to select from the best of the candidates that are available. There are many resources, such as the Colorado Association of School Boards, to use while going through this selection process. I know that I'm not going to read through all 4 pages, but I've done a lot of research over the past couple days, a couple weeks, from hearing that this is going to happen because I'm interested. I really, truly am interested in finding who the best candidate is for Woodland Park going forward. During this selection process, candidates are usually asked to meet with the stakeholders of the school district. I encourage the board to get feedback as to who the right candidate for Woodland Park School District going forward is. I highly encourage getting feedback from all the stakeholders. We urge you to make this decision that is best for Woodland Park Schools. These are our students, these are our staff, and this is our community. And we want the best for them. We really do. I know that I encourage you that you can find the right candidate that's the right fit for us. I encourage you that not to just leave for the next 1 to 2 years, but for several years to come. Because I think the right candidate is out there that can lead the school district for many years. I know that as a representative of WPEA, I have expressed this during our committees that we've worked with, and I will express this again, that the role of WPEA is to partner with the school district, to partner with the school board, and to work together collaboratively. And that is one of the things that I am most proud of, that in my short time, that we can say that we have worked together. And I hope that we can continue on with that process. I know that we are a willing partner, that we can move forward with selecting the best candidate for our Woodland Park schools and the Woodland Park School District. So thank you for the time and your courtesy of giving me this time.
Thank you, Nate. Are there any questions that anyone has for Nate?
Nate, you said it's the position of the WPEA that we basically promote Tina and Dell to interim and hold off on finding a permanent one until the regular hiring season?
No, I did not define on who I would.
Or maybe you're saying,
I would.
what's the position?
If you would like to know a personal opinion, I would be happy to provide that. I know that I've talked with many of my colleagues over the past couple of days, and about the past couple of weeks actually, about who and whom we would enjoy to have as the superintendent, either interim or going forward. But in all reality, I don't know if I want to put out names because the names aren't really important to me and to the WPA as much as the qualities and the qualifications of the next candidate or the superintendent. I firmly believe that those qualities, Dr. Neal mentioned that, and I think bullet point number 4, that those qualities that the board seeks is probably the most important of anything that we can accomplish in determining who our next superintendent is. Obviously, there have been names tossed around in circles.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you for any names. I won't push you out. I'm just saying, I thought I heard you just say that it was the recommendation of the WPEA that we basically hold off until hiring season and post for like a full-time superintendent. Is that correct?
Yes, in terms of looking at the procedure, I think the thing that is best is to have an interim superintendent, and by me, I'm talking about, I represent the teachers. And making sure that we select the right candidate moving forward, because I think that is important. Placing a interim superintendent will really allow our school districts and the board to have the opportunity to interview and select the best candidates that are available.
But when you say that's your position, is that like your personal position, the position of like WPA leadership, or is that the actual majority position adopted by the members of the WPA? Because I'm speculating that you guys have not held a vote on this sort of thing in the 9 days since we accepted the transitional arrangement.
Oh, absolutely. We have not come to a vote, but through conversations, I've had many conversations with several staff members that are both WPEA members and staff members that are not as well, and each of them have expressed to me as a collective that and so to answer your question, no, I do not have a formal document, but there is a general understanding, and I've talked to many staff members that would encourage, and so this is I guess as what you're asking for, I think you're asking for what is the official recommendation from the WPEA. And so I will.
There's not one, right? Because you guys haven't done a vote.
You would be correct that there has not been a vote, but I will say that through several conversations.
I guess I don't understand how the WPA consensus model works then. Do you guys, to have an official position, do you have to take a vote and get a majority from your actual dues-paying members? Or do you just get sort of like, you're the president and other leaders together and kind of have a consensus about what you guys are hearing? How do you determine this is what the members of the union want?
Okay. So the process is to start with the conversations. You can refer to it as hallway conversations, if you so wish, through various medium, whether it be a phone call or a text message or an email sent or meeting for coffee in the morning and saying, hey, how are you feeling? When there's a necessary vote, there will be a vote. But in order to share the general consensus of where WPA is at, I don't feel like there is a vote that is necessary in order to make a statement. Does that answer your question enough for you?
Yeah, that's illuminating.
Okay.
But you were saying you feel like you have gotten this consensus from people who work for the schools but are not dues-paying members of the WPEA as well?
Yes, WPA represents all the staff members of Woodland Park School District.
By virtue of their employment contracts?
No, by virtue of
Sort of a policy that we have?
Is it not?
Doctor-
Well, I think it may be,
there's
maybe contained within the, where's Del when I need Del? Conditions of
yeah, I was going to
Thank you,
say,
Kelly.
in our conditions of employment,
Yeah,
So that is by virtue of their
Okay.
employment contracts.
Well, it's not their contract, it's their handbook, their HR handbook.
Aren't they, that's part of their contracts, supposed to follow that?
Yeah,
Binding on them?
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
does-
So
So-
you guys represent all of them.
so we collectively represent the teachers. And so, you know, during the, the committee where, help me out, the meet and confer process, thank you, where we have representation from the board, we have representation from the executive staff, we have representation from the principals, we have representation from staff members from each of the different schools, and all are represented, and we come together and we work through a process of collaboration to be able to make sure that all of the working conditions and all the bylaws are able to be worked through. If that makes
And you
sense.
guys represent not just our certified staff, but our classified staff as well, by
Yes.
virtue of the
That is correct.
conditions of employment
Yes,
policy.
we do represent our certified and classified staff.
So Nate, just as I understand that, in this short period of time, the conversations that you have had, you haven't had a chance to take a vote or anything, but to, the conversations that you've had with teachers and staff, you want to have an orderly, buy-in with state, you want stakeholder input, and that you'd like it to wait until there is a time when it's the regular hiring time for superintendents, so we have the best poll.
Yes, we'd love to,
Is what I'm understanding.
yes, we'd love to have the best candidates apply for our Woodland Park School District because we are, I want to say that we are the best. I really enjoy working at Woodland Park Schools, and I know that, as was mentioned several times during graduation speeches, and over and over and over again, we are one of the highest school districts in the country, and we intend to continue to be the best.
One question, just for clarification, is, and I don't know if you want to answer it or not, from what you've heard, is there any opposition for temporarily putting existing staff into that position as an interim superintendent? Or tell me about that.
I've not heard any opposition to promoting within, but at the same time, I also know that there are, Dr. Neal presented 4 options, both appointing a interim superintendent, both within the district or outside the district, through some sort of process. I think what I'm hearing from my colleagues is that we are looking to the future, and we want to feel that what is going to be best for the school district is what's going to happen. And I think that's really a quality that we can ensure together, and we can all work together to do that. And by we work together, I mean the board can select the right candidate.
Nate, is it your position that based on the informal conversations you've had for like the past week or so, that there's majority or supermajority support for doing an interim and then hiring permanent in the more traditional cycle?
I would venture on the supermajority side. That is the overwhelming.
How many people do you think you work from in that?
Oh. Are you wanting an approximation, or do you want me to go through and count?
No, like a ballpark figure.
Ballpark, 50 to 100.
50 to 1.
So you wanted a ballpark, somewhere between 50 and 100.
Nate is one of the greatest math teachers in the district. So if you ask a math guy a hard math question, he's gonna
All right.
If you'd like
he's
to
gonna
do
ask
that,
if you want that square root or if you want like the real like number.
I can give you a complex analysis, including imaginary numbers.
Okay. Any other questions for Nate?
I just want to say thank you, and I hear you clearly that you guys are really wanting to process, no matter what, but just finding someone that is the best for the district. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Miller.
Nate, I want to say thank you. I work in a lot of schools and districts, and to have you have the boldness and the preparation and the thoughtfulness to actually honor these guys with that presentation, that's really, really nice. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So my wife is a Presbyterian pastor, and she claims that church politics are the worst. My brother-in-law, who's a real politician, or pretends to be, tells me at every holiday, and particularly this last 4th of July, that school district politics are absolutely the worst, and he feels for me because he perceives that I'm sometimes in the limelight with change management within school districts, and that's certainly the case here. I have a number of things I want to share with you, and I'll try to be organized, and I'll try to go quickly, but I think it's really important stuff. And to the point of our politics being difficult, as we've watched the transitions in parental engagement and the style of parental engagement in schools, the sorts of impulses that actually, frankly, led to some of you being elected or were foundations in your platforms for your campaigns, we just recognize it's different than it's ever been. And it's partly fed by social media, it's partly fed by recognitions that were, come upon through the online exchange of education in 2020 and so forth. And it's difficult and it's dangerous, and in particular, it has become very speculative. If you read any social media about Brad Miller, I'm ostensibly a Koch brothers puppet master who's running around the state architecting all sorts of disruptions in education. And I just wish that were true. But that sort of speculation falls on each of you as well. And one of the things I want to make sure that we say so very clearly here tonight, because it's percolated down, all the way down the hill, up I-25 to Black Forest to me, people are saying this has been orchestrated, this has been planned because there's a particular candidate that this board has in mind, or there's been a scheme established. This is something that was designed for a reason. I know Matthew Neal well enough, Dr. Neal well enough, and I know you well enough, although I've been away for several months because of the merit and facility use transitions, and I wasn't part of that, so I've been a little distant. But I can tell you with assurance, and I can tell all of you with assurance, that this board doesn't have somebody in mind, and in fact, people who might be on your lips as those people in mind are not. That's not real. It's not. So what this board was confronted with a week and a half ago was frankly a bit of a surprise to the board. It's not surprising. Dr. Neal went through as rough a tenure as anyone could, and that's not because you guys are bad, and it's not because this district is broken, it's just because the way all the factors came together, this was just such a heavy lift for everybody. It's been a real difficult year. And you might be surprised to know that superintendencies in Colorado tend to range around 3 years. It's really extraordinary when someone lasts 5 years. In a smaller district, it's more like 2 years on average. The transitions are pretty rapid. This isn't surprising, it's unfortunate, and I'm still looking forward to your next chapter and proud of you and grateful for the great things you've done. I wish I could just list them all here because they're fantastic. But A, this board didn't orchestrate this. This board doesn't have somebody in mind that they're going to just sweep in without process. And in fact, I doubt that any of the people in our community think are candidates, I don't even think they'll arise to be even consideration or even raise their hands to be candidates. I think this is going to be something different than that. As you may know, I work in a district that doesn't have a superintendent, hasn't for years. This transition gives us an opportunity to consider matrix leadership. The proposal that Matthew brought forward with having two sort of executives share different aspects of leadership, it's uncommon, but it's viable. You don't have to have a superintendent in a school district. Your superintendent doesn't have to have a superintendent's license. So you can have a non-traditional sort of individual or individuals be part of what your leadership team looks like. You can outsource some aspects of things. I get to say these things because I don't get a vote in this, right? So I'll just bring some of the hairy things up for you. You can look at this differently than you've ever looked at this before if you want to, because we're out of cycle. Matthew's correct. But there are candidates and individuals who would aspire to be school leaders. They might be principals rather than superintendents. They might be HR directors rather than superintendents. They might be military people rather than educators. All of those people might be viable candidates as you look forward here. So being out of cycle isn't a dead stop, no non-starter type of scenario. And I said this to you in a training months back. In school districts in particular, and I work with a lot of charter schools, and I would say the same for them. Change management is a scenario where you want to move slow to move fast. We want to reflect on what were the elements of our environment that caused us to have to face this change at this time. We want to be self-reflective. We want to have process, and then we want to think about what's best. So the 4 scenarios that Matthew provided to you are all right on point. And those are probably, that's as far as my list would go as well. Your sausage making on the important things is really critical here too. And Chris, for that reason, or whoever else was questioning the agenda, I think some of this work is best done in committee. And I'll just explain briefly why I think that. When we think about what are we thinking are the credentials for our future superintendent, what is the timeline for that, which stakeholders are going to be engaged in how, who gets a vote at what level, because we might have a position where we're cutting down candidates from some group to a smaller group to then a group that is interviewed by the board. Who gets those decisions and how do those work? Those things are really important. And if we just run to some sort of standard process that we've done before, we might miss some opportunities. We want to review the contract. Matthew correctly observed that his contract was replete with things that had to do with his predecessors. Old wounds coming back to fester in a contract that had nothing to do with his behaviors and his performances. And so we want to be careful about the way we present that, and the contract matters to a prospective next superintendent, particularly out of cycle. So I would suggest that we not make any decisions tonight. We can't, frankly. That we consider a means, whether it's a subcommittee or a delegation of other sorts, to create some of the proposals or recommendations, maybe even, on process and on the elements of the posting, and then this board gets back together and very transparently engages with those things. But making some of the sausage in advance and then trying to form the burritos once you get together is a healthier or more efficient way to do this, and it's not non-transparent. A couple other things. If you are at a point where you're hiring a superintendent, the thing that Dr. Neal alluded to is that the statute gives us a requirement that once we have identified finalists, and Dr. Neal was a finalist in Alaska, as you're in Anchorage, we have to, in Colorado, name the finalist or finalists. It can be 3, it can be 5, it can be 1. And leave a 14-day sort of period for our community to have an opportunity to, Google them and maybe have a couple of town halls so that they can engage with your community. And we can't make a hiring decision, final decision, for 14 days after we have identified the finalists. So that's the difference for a permanent superintendent search. In an interim search, if you were to engage somehow from an internal, an internal hire of some sort, and he gave you a proposal, you don't have to post that. And you can, as a board, make that decision at some point. It doesn't have to, if you're making an internal interim proposal, make sure I'm saying the interim part, you don't have to do an external posting of some sort. If you're going to hire anyone from the outside, I highly recommend, because of some HR laws that passed in Colorado this last year, that we post and give every candidate an opportunity, whether internal or external, to apply for a and even an interim position. Good news, there are some interim candidates out there, people who have retired that might be available. And then, frankly, because of your size, I hesitate to bring this up because it sort of carries the baggage of what I do, but I will tell you that there's leadership in places like charter schools that might have the skill sets to be superintendents as well, and there'll be some of those that are out of cycle too that might be available. So there are some candidates out there on the horizon.
Question. What legally is the distinction between like a permanent versus an interim superintendent? Can they only serve a certain amount of time?
Yeah, well, there's not a statute that addresses this, so it has to do with the label and frankly the message that you're communicating to your community. I mean, at some point, interim to me oftentimes is either change agent or maintenance, and I want you to be really clear about that too. If you want somebody who's keeping status quo, and you need to be really clear on what that person's role is. I would think in this situation, potentially it would be a status quo. Let's just kind of keep everybody comfortable and supported and communicated with. But in terms of duration, I've seen 2-year interims.
So if we did not hire a superintendent, but we had a matrix leadership like you referred to, is that from existing staff? Does that require a posting?
If it's going to become permanent, then yes, and this has to do both with new state law. So it's basically an anti-discrimination law that requires that we post things because there's been sort of a history of male dominance in certain roles getting higher. So this is to even that out to make sure that everybody gets a chance. So yes.
So point of clarification, an internal interim would not require that.
Yeah, sort of a maintenance, like you sort of suggested, hey, for at least a couple of months, we have a couple of people that could do
But
this.
if the board decided at some point to say, that's a structure we're going to move forward with. We're going to have regions, we're going to have academic region, we're going to have operational region. We think that might work permanently. The board would be required by statute to post that for the 3 days and then to go through the finalist notification of the 2 candidates or something like that.
So that superintendent finalist notification, that 14 days thing, is actually only specifically for superintendents.
So if you had.
But I will tell you that every charter school I work with, I require that they do that because it's a sort of a surrogate for that. I would do it for us if we had a matrix.
But my point is that you could do that April, May, and June, or March, April, and May. If the determination was this structure was working, or let's say that you had an external interim that you wanted to make as a permanent, you can make that decision later on down the road.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So I appreciate your suggestion not to make decisions tonight. However, there is this question about committee, and you brought that back around. And so can you talk a little bit more about how you've seen that work? And
Yes.
Any suggestions around that?
So I think it's not inappropriate to have board voice in developing some of the protocols, sort of building the architecture of what you're going to do, the timelines, and what do we need to address, and maybe some suggestions around the position description and maybe even the contract. So, what are the requirements? Do they have to have a superintendent's license? Do they blah, 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 all these things? It could be a couple of board members along with Dell, along with maybe Matthew. It could be, you could involve more stakeholders in that if you'd like. But I don't think it's inappropriate to have 1 or 2, probably 2 board members be engaged in that, so that it's kind of like your earlier discussion around other hires, just to sort of make sure that it's moving in the correct direction that would likely be acceptable to the board. There's just a lot of work in forming all this stuff, and you'd have a 7-hour meeting if you tried to do it as a meeting in this artificial setting in front of a bunch of people. So if you can just sort of facilitate it in advance, I think that's helpful.
Thank you. So circling back around to something that Dr. Neal brought up, and it has to do with sort of our own team development. And I think it reflects in, just the need for clarity of vision, clarity of, just really what do we want. And also like, do the policies line up and match? I think for me, it feels like that is essential. That's first. Unless we're just content with having an interim who's going to maintain status quo while we sort that out. But I feel like that's essential for us to sort that out. And whether in sorting that out, we have explored like what it means to have a matrix, what it means to, think outside the box, and what it means to just do it the way this district has done it in the past. I think those conversations, I don't want to relegate that to a committee to decide all of that.
Absolutely not to decide, but I think to propose, right? So that you can, it's easier as a board to grapple with something that's proposed to you. He's proposed to you an approach that kind of creates a concrete understanding of what we're kind of dealing with, and that's very healthy. I think if you had a board subcommittee proposing approaches, and then you could, decide on them, that it's both an efficiency, but I also think it's just a real wise way to do things. I gotta tell you, I really want you to think about moving slow. If we were to hasten to the proposal that he suggested, might be exactly right. But once you do that, that's committing to a couple of individuals something that's kind of hard to retract and readdress later. And if you messed up there, it's going to be hard on individuals, and I want to be hard on individuals as you go forward. So let's make sure every deliberate step we take forward, we're okay with. We make sure that we're good with that, and we're not just in a rush. I've worked with Miles, I've worked with Dell, I've worked with Tina. These guys are remarkable. They're very capable, and even if they don't have a new title, we're not going to fall apart here. So I'm not saying this needs to be 3 months down the road, but make sure you're thoughtful about it.
I think that at our next meeting, one of the main things that we need to have on the agenda is a discussion of how do we form that committee to investigate the things that you just said and the concerns that Chris just had. And I think that that's very important that we do take it deliberately with including people. The main reason, the concern that I had most for this meeting tonight was to discuss and begin that process. But I know I keep repeating it. I want to make sure that our school and community knows that we have a plan going forward, that our schools are going to open on time, that staff is good, that we have leadership in place to make school happen. So that's why I wanted to have Nate and have input from the WPEA, for the teachers, for Dr. Neal to say we have competent people in place to move forward. And I hope that we communicated that tonight. I know I thank you for doing that. The next step is this. What is the process that we're going through? And I'd like to hear Chris said that this is something he would like to see the board decide the direction that we're going. I'd like to hear from the other board members, how do you see us taking the next step on the hiring process or the matrix process?
Well, I think it's important that we get a sense of the qualities that we're looking for in leadership, whether it's one person and whether it's, this matrix idea. What are we hoping that person or that team, can they bring to it? What can they accomplish? I do like the idea of a committee so that we can bring those stakeholders into the process before like that, like 14-day window where it's like, well, in those 14 days you'll hear from them. Let's get involved before that. And so I think a committee can be good in terms of making proposals to the board, like Dr. Neal makes, and will continue to make proposals to the board, or the WPA and things like that. What I think might be a good idea, right, is we anticipate a meeting before too long that we basically come with proposals as to, who would be on the committee, like, would be all of our principals, or one or two of our principals, Valentina, those sorts of things, and try and narrow down who we could put on this committee so it's effectively represents a cross-section of our leaders, our supporters, our community, without becoming too unwieldy, and because we might have to move at a fairly efficient pace. So,
How many people are we looking at to have on this committee?
Mr. President, may I pose a question for
Please.
clarification? Sorry. I'm hearing the word use of the word committee, and I see it in two different buckets. One is a committee for maybe the hiring. Once the board has decided on the quality of the candidate, you want somebody with experience, or you want somebody fresh out of college. That's a bad example, but is the board going to require that somebody has had a previous superintendency before they come into this? That's always kind of a key. We're not going to talk to anybody that hasn't already been a school leader, or we're okay with you brought up the military leadership role. Is it board? So one committee is the board coming together and deciding qualifications and nature of kind of what the board thinks is ideal among the board. Then there's an external committee of stakeholders, of staff, of teachers, of WPA that is kind of marinating and coming together on those two. And then there's also a third committee concept, which Chris brought up and Brad brought up also, is the mechanics of a contract and the mechanics of a policy role, right? And so you almost may have 2 or 3 committees here. One committee of the board that's coming up with the dynamics related to a contract. Are you going to minimally require that the person sign in for 2 years because you don't want to go through a search again a year later? Are you going to require that they have a doctorate degree? Are those things that are in their contract? I think there's a contract committee. There's also a qualities of the person committee, and there's also maybe even a committee of the board of 2 people that said our timeline looks like this, our structure looks like here. The committee members are mayor, city council, chamber of commerce. Those are the ones that come to mind right now. Teachers, staff. You may have several subcommittees of the board that are tackling certain components of the superintendent search process. They come back, meet on the 18th, make the decision, come back a week later and say, all right, this is kind of what we're coming up with from a thinking standpoint. What does the board feel as a whole? This feels good? Doesn't feel good? How do you do that? Sorry, Cassie, I jumped in.
No.
On kind of the committee concept.
He was originally speaking of the subcommittee of stakeholders, speaking of principals, so I was just wondering if we should limit some of that, or where that limit would go, or where, who those people would be.
I'm actually suggesting, my suggestion on the committee that I was suggesting would be comprised of 2 of you with some assignment to work both with HR, through Dell probably, through Matthew, potentially through me, if that's part of the consideration, and for that committee to come back to the board as a whole with some concrete proposals about, are we going to first approach an internal, sort of giving you a proposal on what's the best sort of formula for doing this.
We're coming up with a macro process rather than a micro process, or?
Yeah, maybe even assessing more carefully with Dr. Neal his proposal and just evaluating the pros and cons of that, and just sort of searching through this a little bit in a, just in a get your fingers dirty type of way, just to understand it well, so that the board makes the right decision. Because again, your next decision is important.
Very.
like that. And I also agree with Chris Austin that we need to go over some of the policies as well, you know, as far as like the executive policies and even the purpose. You know, I think that was supposed to be touched in June, and I don't know if you guys went over that.
Just review.
I think we all are under the consensus that we are working on fire board's policies and their beliefs, and it's no secret that we have different ideas or different values, and not to say that theirs were bad, ours are going in a different direction, and I think that's very important to revise or edit or make new policies in the direction and the value of this board, because if we don't do that, then how is our new leader? We need to have a roadmap for a new leader, and he needs to know the values, and they need to, that's a big consideration, whether is that the road that they want to go down? We need to have something written down. And I think what Cassie brought up is very, very, very important, and we have to have a roadmap before we can hire somebody to be the leader. Yes.
What do you think though about like appointing 2 board members to consult, Matthew, Dell, and Tina, and perhaps Kevin, and Vaughn, coming back to the board like in about 2 weeks, like around July 18th, with a solid set of proposals to kick things off and get the discussion going amongst the whole board? You know, it sounds like there's a lot of territory to cover.
It's almost like there are 2 different things.
Yes.
The one is exactly what I hear everybody saying for the new superintendent, or the direction that we're going to go, but also clarification for the people that we have in place that are going to launch the new school year in just a couple weeks. It's like there are 2 things that have to be taken care of. The one, the appointing that, now do you see those blending together, or what?
I almost feel like we should walk and chew gum at the same time. And have, you know, I mean, come back in about 2 weeks with sort of a superintendent committee with proposals about what are the qualities we're looking for, what is the direction we want to go in, what are we thinking about contract term, what are we thinking about experience in leadership and education and everything. The sort of thing that we can probably get a lot of stuff from Matthew and Dell and Tina on that, as well as our veteran principals. And I'm sure, you know, Miles is sort of, he's got some important things to add too. And then, honestly, we should probably have some board members at the same time, maybe put also on the agenda, like proposals for amending some of our governance policies.
Can you speak into the microphone, please? Sorry for the interruption.
So, some of our governance policies, so that we can kind of hit the ground running, maybe be in a position to adjust those while getting a direction forward on superintendent search as well.
That feels like a lot of movement simultaneously during a month, as Tom Weston says, when schools won't do anything. And to take your advice, to go slow, to go fast. I'm not trying to throw gum in the works. I'm just saying, I don't know if modifying policies right now is actually going to solve the bigger questions of what's the vision of this board. I think those are like to be more clearly articulated. Maybe even to dispel some of the speculations. That it would be helpful for us to have a unified voice in what we actually as a board are valuing. Because just to be candid, I'm not sure I fully understand. And so I'm left to some speculation. Because we attempted at one point, earlier this year, to have a vision casting workshop. We spent the day doing that. And I'm not sure that got any real traction, at least no clear articulation for me. And so I feel like that's an essential step. And I think it would do well for us, not only to be able to move forward with some clarity, but also to help answer the questions that a lot of our stakeholders have. And to really, again, bring that transparent clarity. And I think that would go a long way for us as a board. So I think this is my hesitation in simultaneously working on modification of policies while we're trying to come up with a kind of a clear pathway forward feels too much. It feels cumbersome, and it feels fraught with the potential for tremendous misunderstanding. And I do have the lens of public relations. I'm a relational guy. And so just from where I'm sitting, having now been on this board for 3 years, I do think about optics because I think it matters. Not that we try to fabricate a veneer, but to actually remove any veneers for the sake of just that trust building, really. And so that's my thought. I'm a bit concerned about adding too much to this.
Mr. President, may I? Sure. There are 3 buckets in my mind happening in the next 30 days. First bucket is getting principals back on track, get our staff here, new staff, and culture and vision, and starting the year. Outside of merit and getting the doors open that Miles is working on, right? Physical structure. Second bucket is hiring a superintendent and or interim. And the third bucket I'm hearing is the policy discussion. Maybe policy discussion linked with vision, right? Maybe both of those. I personally, and as the guy that will soon get to watch from afar how the sausage is made, I would think if the board would want to go down the policy-making, policy-changing, dynamic road, that would be just hard from my perspective as a new superintendent coming in, and I'm watching that. I'd rather have that handed to me as I came in, and say, here is the way that this district is going to function. Again, I'm not tooting my own horn with the proposal I gave earlier. The board can do whatever the board would like to do. But selecting a candidate, a long-term candidate, and doing policy changing at the same time is almost conflicting in my mind, where the new candidate would really need to know or want to know what that world looked like. It does lend itself to thinking a little bit more of an internal promotion to an interim position. If the board is going to take 6 months, 3 months, go through a policy revision cycle. I'm looking at Kelly a little bit to knowing those policies. And you saw when Tina did the sensitive subject policies, there were 36 other policies that had to be changed. When the board goes down the road of changing a policy, absolutely within your authority, the triage that happens from that, each one of those is important to capture that. So three processes: getting the school year started, hiring a superintendent, changing policy. Those buckets seem to be clear to me from tonight's discussion.
Yeah, I think we should appoint a committee, I guess, on here, just to position us in the ability to actually make some forward progress. And not just spend like 2 weeks just sort of thinking about it and then coming back and being really no further ahead than we are. And I do think that we can, in the same time, come together and reflect on an overall sort of vision. I think those inherently are linked with what we're looking for in leadership in the school district. So I'm not talking about like a wholesale revision of every policy we've got, but we should, we've been waiting to have our 5th member to really get back to that sort of vision, mission, and direction. And with the need to get a new superintendent or a new leadership in place, it seems the time is upon us to go ahead and hammer that out together. I mean, they're just going to be the same. If we can appoint a committee, we can at least have some board members in a position lawfully to consult with executive staff and at least try and make some forward progress by the next meeting. So that's what I think we should do.
Sue or anybody else want to comment on that? Yes?
Yeah, I'm not wanting to change all the policies. I just think we should have like Sue said, a roadmap. I think that was a great descriptive word for what I was trying to say, just like a vision going forward. The purpose. That way the superintendent, and correct me if I'm wrong, just so if a new superintendent's coming in, they sort of know what the vision is, and to work with the executive staff and to know what they're doing. I do like the idea of having a board committee because, like Brad Miller said and advised, that we're coming in and we're already talking, we're having something to present for the next meeting going forward. I think that's a good way, especially in a short amount of time, so the culture of the staff, and looking at Neil nodding his head. So yeah, having the staff sort of knowing where the direction is going for the next school year, and the teachers and community.
Sue, did you want to hear?
I agree. We need to deal with the policies and some of the governance policies that we've discussed it in the. We need a vision. We need to write out our vision. We need to write down our purpose, because we cannot have in good conscience hire a new superintendent without us knowing what our roadmap is. It's not fair to them. They need to know what's expected of them. They need to know the values of the board. It's only fair to do. And I agree with Director Illingworth that we can do this simultaneously, because we're dealing with apples and oranges here. And I think it can both be done at the same time. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. We can do this.
So thank you. I'm just asking for clarity. Are you thinking in terms of not having a leadership, but going straight towards hiring a full-time superintendent? Is that your orientation?
No, that is not my intentions. I do think we need to start a committee. Us, collaborative as a board, need to dig into the policies that we think are important to change, so we can have a positive and honest contract put out there for our superintendent, because it's only fair to them to, this is what our expectations are, these are our governance policies, these are our values. It's only fair to the new employee to know what that is, and it needs to be in writing.
I agree with
So
you.
thank you, David. If I can restate what I'm hearing, let me suggest that you might make a motion here to create a subcommittee of 2 to work with your senior staff, including Dr. Neal, to work towards bringing proposals at your meeting on the week of July 18th for the process for, and the proposal towards whether it's an internal or an external interim, and or maybe just a sort of a matrix of peers doing something. So whatever that proposal would look like, coming back to you in that time. And once you've decided what that is, and you've decided at that meeting presumably a timeline for when you're going to go out for pursuing a superintendent, then to Sue's good point, you will define a timeline for, within that, creating your roadmap and clarifying and declaring it so that your future candidates would be aware of what that is.
Yes. So if I can narrow it down one more time, even one more, addressing everybody. So I see 3 important things. Where's our leadership starting this school year? a policy clarification for our new hire or transitional, and then pursuit of a superintendent. So we could do those two things at the same time, but it's so important that we have a clear direction for our superintendent. So I would make a motion, am I allowed to make a motion? Sure. That we appoint 2 directors to work with Dr. Neal and the executive staff and present back to the board the week of the 18th on a proposal for our short-term leadership, whatever that's going to look like. Is that clear?
Once, this sort of thing always goes round and round the bend if you don't really specify. So you want to, I would suggest that your motion include designation of the individuals and, well, that's the main thing. And then, I guess everything else can be a little bit speculative, but you appoint a board, appoint a committee. So think of who it is.
Well, I cannot be part of it. So
No, I mean, well, you're gonna be,
I'll be back
Got some other
for
stuff
that
going
week of
on.
the 18th.
you got some other stuff going on in the
Yes,
inside.
yes. Who would like to be on it?
I'll volunteer.
I'll be on it.
Anybody else? It's just me and Chris.
No, I mean, I'm
I saw your
open.
hand was sort of like-
Well, I'm open, but I didn't know with Chris's schedule too, because he's, so,
I'm around.
I'm around. So,
Round. All right, so we have 3 people who want to be on it. We have 4 people who want to be on it.
How can all 4 of us?
Yeah.
Well, we have to narrow it down.
We have to narrow it
You
down.
say you have posted meetings.
Say it again?
You have 4, but then it's posted meetings, so that, or even 3. 2 might be better in this context, because you're wanting to have intimate meetings with your leadership, so I would suggest 2.
Okay.
I suggest Director Austin and Director Woodward.
Well, would you like to make a motion? Let's pick are we allowed to take a vote on who's going to be part of it? Or are you just going to accept volunteers?
Yes, sir. Whatever motion you make at this point, I think is well covered under your agenda for creating a subcommittee.
Well, then let's make 2 votes and then we'll vote on the, what this subcommittee is going to be and who's going to be on it. So,
Which one are we doing first?
So the motion that he just was in the process of making before legal counsel provided an addition was to develop a committee with 2 members, presumably, Mr.
I know
Alston.
who we're voting on the members first, and then doing the motion that had the 2 selected board members within that motion that you wrote.
You can do the whole, all in one motion.
I just want to ask, so Sue, did you raise your hand for this too? And Cassie, you raised your hand for this too? For the
I'm
committee?
good with you.
yeah, if you guys want it. it's
They've
fine.
acquiesced.
I mean, I'm open and available and would like to get to know the staff more, but.
Yeah, I'm really actually kind of struggling with this. As I argued in May, this is not a good time for me personally. I would do this, and I would actually enjoy the opportunity to work together and do this, but I think I'm going to respectfully recuse myself after giving myself a few minutes to think about this.
Oh, well, we're just talking about for the next 2 weeks, Chris.
Yeah, you don't know what's on my calendar for the next 2 weeks. It's pretty bonkers.
No, I just mean, if things are tight for the next 2 weeks, it doesn't necessarily mean.
No, right, and so
going
this being an
forward.
advisory committee to the
Yeah.
board,
Could we always switch out and take your turns, like, I don't know.
all right, so
You can tap out.
you were on the way to making a very good motion for Kelly to write down. Would you
I-
clarify my
It
motion?
was just to appoint 2 directors by name for the purpose of meeting with staff for in your words were a short-term leadership solution.
and to provide proposals to the board at its meeting in the week of July 18th.
Yes, sir.
You have that, Kelly?
No. One more time, please.
So,
It's changed a couple times.
Again, the motion that I was hearing, which would probably need to be restated by a member of the board, would be to move that a committee be established to include naming 2 members
Right?
to establish a short-term leadership solution and bring that proposal back to the board the week of the 18th.
When you're done, can you read that back, please?
Here what I have, motion to create a subcommittee of 2 Board of Education members to establish a short-term leadership solution, working with Dr. Neal and executive staff to present back to the Board of Education on the week of July 18th, 2022.
Is that correct?
Whoever makes the motion, say the names.
We don't have a second anymore. At Illingworth. And then Austin was there, but he recused. So who is?
So I'll step in
Yeah.
if you want to do.
So I agree with both of those. Do we have to take, if we just name these 2, do we have to take 2 votes? I'm happy with both of them.
Somebody just needs to
Right.
say the magic words.
So, understood. So we have Director Illingworth and Kimbrell on there.
Correct.
So I make a motion that we
Let her read it.
Read it.
You can say so moved.
so move.
Okay. Motion to create subcommittee of 2 Board of Education members. Do you want me to say their names? Okay. Illingworth II and Director Kimbrell to establish short-term leadership solution, working with Dr. Neal and executive staff to present back to the Board of Education on the week of July 18th, 2022.
So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Austin.
Aye.
Illingworth.
Aye.
Kimbrell.
Aye.
Patterson.
Aye.
Westerholz.
Aye. No.
Okay.
All right, so we have that. I'm happy we're moving in that direction. Okay. We're on to final remarks. Any directors have a remark?
Is it appropriate for me to speak up about the policies? How would that come about? If individual directors pick up policy they think it's not in line with this board's vision and also present that, how would that work?
I'll address that and say, Sue, that you could either request that David Westerholz in a future agenda setting set this as an agenda item, and with whatever specifics you want to ask, and with his consent, that he can establish that onto a board agenda. That might be a great way to start you. So perhaps that's your August board agenda, for example.
President Westerholz, could we put the policy?
And Sue, you could follow up with him maybe, and directly to kind of give him some guidance as to what it exactly is that you're looking for, so he can sort of design that agenda item.
Yeah, like if you have a particular policy in mind, or you're like, okay, GP whatever, we put it,
GP6,
Right.
GP8.
put that on the agenda and put it on there and we can check.
I have a question, it's related to that, Sue, actually. My understanding is this board is scheduled for a board retreat in August, is that correct? It's usually at least historically, it's been pretty much all day. And that's usually kind of like the beginning of the school year, and this is a great time for us to actually work through the vision. Because I think, I remember reading a letter to the editor recently about the importance of the policy supporting the vision. And so I think if we're not careful, we'll get the cart before the horse. And I think that if we have a board retreat in August, that would be a fantastic opportunity for us to actually bring some clarity to vision and then begin to allow the policies to support the vision. And so my recommendation, Mr. Russell, is that is that if we have that board retreat, that this would be an opportunity for the board to work through its vision moving forward into this year. And I think that the timeline on that, especially since the committee is going to bring a proposal for a short-term leadership strategy, this would be kind of a simultaneous next step for us to create that roadmap for the potential superintendent or leadership team in the future. So
Your short-term leader solution would actually facilitate that meeting.
yes, it would. Because we're not going to be asking a more permanent leader or leadership team to adhere to something that has not been clearly articulated yet. So I think you're right. I think that feels like maybe walking and chewing gum.
Yes. Good reminder, board retreat, yeah.
Yep. I think that's where I would want to see that. We have in the past at board retreats gone through policies. We've actually gone through the executive expectations and scheduling. I mean, when we devote a significant amount of time together to do that sort of work, we can get a lot of traction at a relatively short amount of time, any day. So I would recommend that.
During waking hours.
Yeah, right. I would recommend that happen at the board retreat in August.
I agree.
Yeah, that's very good. And we've got quite a few suggestions here for agenda items, so, put together in an email to everybody what those are, or have Kelly to send those out and respond on what are important agenda items.
So thank
That
you.
is okay to talk about agenda items, isn't it? Or is that?
Well,
is that?
I think that's a one-on-one interaction is best, because your exemption from open meetings violations is really limited to logistical matters, not substantive matters. So if it's substantive and you're wrestling over which GP you're going to deal with, I think that gets in the realm of substantive. So I'd rather you have those direct interactions. You can propose a template of the agenda to all and just ask that they only respond to you individually.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we are on any other directors. Comments for this evening?
Just really quick, something I want us to keep in mind, maybe something that come up in a board retreat, is I really do think that we should invite our new Woodland Park Police Chief and Sheriff and other security leaders to come discuss with us about any ideas they may have as to how we can improve school safety. I was thinking about that because Miles was talking about the security camera backups and everything. And I'd like to get a better sense of our security measures. I know in general we have school resource officers. In general we have the Raptor system, and we have surveillance cameras and things like that. I'd like to get a more wholesale sense of it and get an idea of, like, is there anything, and I'm sure there is, that we could do to improve the security and safety of our schools.
May I, on that note, Director Illingworth, we are in the process right now of replacing Sean Goings. That was also in my September 20th update. So you'll have a new Director of Safety and Security sitting here. It may be good for that person to, 30 days in, give you a lay of the land of kind of what they see and their policies and their procedures, and kind of this is my 30-day update of I've met with the police chief, or maybe have the police chief, and I mean, letting them own that relationship a little bit between chief and Mike Soul, and kind of these are what we've worked on. This is kind of what we see as holes. This is what we see as success factor. I mean, yes, a very big issue or big opportunity. But we're missing that link right now with Sean resigning. And so I feel an emptiness to that. It's not that the security procedures are diminished. It's the fact that we're right in the middle of hiring that person. So
Please be attentive to, if you want granular, really direct input on security measures, you want to combine an executive session for that conversation with a public session so that people can understand the breadth of your security. I think it's really important to do both.
Good, thank you for that.
So may I request a 30-day delay until we have that person?
Whenever we.
Yeah, if we could bring that up at our retreat as well, on how we want to handle it. Any other director have any comments? Closing comments?
I just wish you all the best with your, just your procedure, what's happening with you physically. And I just trust that that will all go well and you'll be healthy and whole moving forward and running 50-mile races with a smile on your face.
Well, thank you, Chris.
I also want to thank the staff and Superintendent Neal and Fred Miller and Miles and Nate Owens for coming in after our holiday weekend and giving the presentation and update so we can move forward in the next couple of weeks. So, and Kelly as well, thank you.
Anyone else? Superintendent?
I don't have any comments this evening. I think we've covered it. We have
Covered
covered
it.
it.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Austin.
Aye.
Ellinger.
Aye.
Campbell. Patterson. Aye. Russell.
No. Aye. Meeting's adjourned.